Apologize to my mother and sister immediately, or pack your bags and leave, my husband ordered as his family humiliated me during Thanksgiving dinner. I did not argue. I packed 2 suitcases, took our 3-year-old son, and bought 2 one-way tickets overseas. Hours later, their phones started ringing nonstop because the financial empire they so proudly flaunted was about to be seized by the federal government. My name is Meredith, 33 years old, and for the past 5 years, I played the submissive quiet wife to a man who thought my silence meant weakness. I let his family believe my freelance bookkeeping business barely generated enough to buy groceries. Last Thanksgiving, they finally pushed me past my breaking point. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who severely underestimated your worth. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, I learned the value of hard work early on. I paid my own way through college and built a highly specialized career. But when I married Donovan, a 35-year-old vice president at his family private equity firm, I entered a world of old money, massive egos, and suffocating judgment. His mother, Patricia, was a 62-year-old matriarch who ruled the family with a designer iron fist. From the moment we met, she made it perfectly clear that my background was a stain on their pristine lineage. She constantly reminded everyone that I was beneath them, treating me less like a daughter-in-law and more like an unpaid servant who had somehow tricked her brilliant son into marriage. The Thanksgiving dinner that ended it all took place in Patricia's sprawling multi-million-dollar estate in the Hamptons. The dining room was suffocatingly opulent, with crystal chandeliers casting a harsh glare over the catered feast. I was seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, trying to quietly feed my 3-year-old son Leo. Across from me sat Brittany, Donovan's 30-year-old sister and the undisputed golden child of the family. She was loudly bragging about the brand new Porsche she had just purchased, twisting her diamond rings so they caught the light. Her husband, Kendrick, a 32-year-old African-American financial genius who effectively ran the back-end operations of their entire firm, sat quietly next to her. Despite Kendrick being the actual brains behind their recent profits, Patricia and Donovan treated him with the same barely concealed disdain they reserved for me. They used him as their workhorse, a highly paid scapegoat who did all the heavy lifting while they took the credit and the bonuses. Kendrick caught my eye across the table and offered a small, sympathetic smile. We were the two outsiders trapped in a den of narcissists. Patricia took a slow sip of her vintage wine, her eyes locking onto me with predatory focus. She reached across the table, grabbed a used gravy-stained cloth napkin, and tossed it directly at my chest. It landed on my lap, ruining the simple dress I had bought specifically for this dinner. "Grab that napkin and take these plates to the kitchen, Meredith," Patricia commanded, her voice ringing loud enough to stop all other conversation. "You are used to cleaning up messes, right? It is the least you can do since your little pennies-a-day bookkeeping hobby contributes absolutely nothing to this family. You should be grateful we even allow you at this table." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady for Leo's sake. "I am eating dinner with my son, Patricia. The catering staff can clear the plates when we are finished." Donovan slammed his wine glass down, the red liquid sloshing over the rim. "Do not speak to my mother that way," he snapped. "She is entirely right. You do not contribute. You sit at home playing with spreadsheets while I carry the financial weight of this entire household." Patricia smiled smugly, leaning forward. "Exactly. We all know the truth. We even had to pay your exorbitant hospital bills when Leo was born because your meager savings could not cover a decent ward. You are a charity case, Meredith." My hands gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. Her words were a calculated, venomous lie. I clearly remembered the panic in Donovan's voice 3 years ago when he confessed he had gambled away our entire joint savings on reckless, unauthorized stock trades. He had begged me to use my personal funds to cover the hospital bills so his mother would not find out about his massive failure. I had taken the blame, letting his family believe I was broke, and financially dependent solely to protect his fragile ego and his position at the firm. I had swallowed my pride to save his, and this was my reward. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. The absolute injustice of the moment consumed me. But before I could formulate a response that would not reveal my actual profession, disaster struck. Leo, sensing the hostile energy directed at me, became fussy. He reached across the table for a dinner roll, his little arm brushing against a heavy silver gravy boat. It tipped over, sending a thick wave of dark brown gravy cascading directly onto Brittany's lap, splattering all over her $1,000 designer silk dress. Brittany shrieked as if she had been burned, jumping out of her chair and knocking over her wine glass in the process. "Look what your brat just did to my dress," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my terrified toddler. "This is exactly what happens when you let low-class people raise children. They have absolutely no manners." Leo began to cry, his lower lip trembling as he shrank back against my side. I immediately reached for a clean towel to wipe his hands, trying to soothe him. "It was an accident, Brittany," I said calmly. "He is only 3 years old. I will pay for the dry cleaning." "With what money?" Brittany mocked, wiping frantically at the stain. "You do not have a dime to your name." Suddenly Donovan stood up. His face was red with fury. He reached across the corner of the table and grabbed Leo by the arm, squeezing tightly and pulling him away from me. Leo screamed in actual pain, terrified by his father's aggression. "Let go of him right now," I demanded, standing up and shoving Donovan's arm away to shield my crying son. Donovan towered over me, his eyes filled with pure contempt. "Look at the mess you and your undisciplined kid have caused," he yelled, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You embarrass me. You bring absolutely no value to my life. Apologize to my mother and sister immediately, or pack your bags and leave." The entire room fell dead silent. Patricia was smirking clearly, relishing my public humiliation. Brittany was glaring at me with her arms crossed. Kendrick looked away, his jaw tight, completely powerless to intervene against his employers. They were all waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the poor dependent wife to cry, to beg for forgiveness, to surrender completely to their control, because she had nowhere else to go. I looked at Donovan. I looked at the man I had covered, for the man whose massive financial crimes I had been quietly documenting for 3 long years, under the guise of my freelance bookkeeping. I wiped the tears from Leo's cheeks and lifted him into my arms, resting his head against my shoulder. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not defend myself. I looked Donovan dead in the eye, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Okay." I turned my back on the Thanksgiving feast, walked out of the dining room, and headed straight up the grand staircase. The silence I left behind was absolute, but the storm I was about to unleash upon them would be deafening. I closed the heavy oak door of the master bedroom and immediately pulled 2 sleek black suitcases from the top shelf of the walk-in closet. I had packed the essentials 3 weeks ago, hiding them behind Donovan's racks of tailored suits. Leo was clinging tightly to my neck, his small face buried in my shoulder. I set him down gently on the center of the king-sized bed and handed him his favorite plush bear. I told him we were going on a special adventure. The bedroom door slammed open with enough force to rattle the framed wedding photos on the wall. Donovan marched in, his face flushed with the vintage wine he had been aggressively consuming downstairs. He pointed a finger at me, laughing a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed in the large room. "You are actually packing. Where exactly do you think you are going, Meredith? You do not have a single dime to your name." I completely ignored him. I unzipped the first suitcase and quickly transferred Leo's remaining winter coats and shoes from his dresser. Donovan paced the room, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the plush carpet like a caged animal looking for a strike. "You think you can just embarrass my mother at Thanksgiving dinner and walk out? You are playing a stupid game, Meredith. You will not last 2 days out there in the real world without my credit cards. You have no real job. You have no real income." I moved calmly to my vanity table. I did not need his credit cards. I reached for my favorite leather handbag. Taking a small pair of nail scissors from my makeup bag, I carefully sliced the false bottom seam I had meticulously sewn shut 3 years ago. I slid my fingers inside the lining and pulled out a sleek silver hard drive. It was no larger than a pack of gum, but it held the absolute weight of Donovan's entire world. This drive contained every offshore account ledger. It held the records of every dummy corporation and shell company. It detailed every illegal wire transfer his family private equity firm had made to mask their staggering fraud. I had spent 3 years posing as his quiet, dependent wife, doing basic freelance bookkeeping for local shops just to justify my hours staring at a computer screen. Donovan thought I was reconciling grocery store receipts for pennies. In reality, I was untangling the complex web of his money laundering scheme as an elite forensic auditor for the federal government. I slipped the drive securely into my inner coat pocket, feeling the cold metal press against my chest. Donovan mistook my silence for fear. He stepped closer, his breath reeking of alcohol and pure entitlement. "If you walk out that door with my son, I will make your life a living hell, Meredith. I will hire the most vicious lawyers in New York City. I will take full custody of Leo. I will tell the judge you are unstable and financially destitute. Who do you think they will believe? A powerful vice president of a billion-dollar equity firm, or a glorified housemaid who cannot even afford to pay her own cell phone bill?" I zipped up the second suitcase with a sharp, decisive sound. I picked up Leo, balancing him securely on my left hip, and grabbed the extended handles of both suitcases with my right hand. I walked right past Donovan. He actually stepped back, visibly surprised that I was not breaking down into tears or begging for his forgiveness. He expected a dramatic fight, but I had nothing left to say to him. The staircase felt incredibly long as I descended. From the formal dining room, I could hear Patricia and Brittany talking loudly, making absolutely sure I could hear their toxic venom. Patricia was complaining about the gravy-stained dress and demanding that Donovan freeze my monthly allowance immediately so I would be forced to sleep on the streets. Brittany was laughing, agreeing that I was nothing but trash who ruined their perfect holiday. I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked into the grand entryway. I stopped at the massive marble console table near the front door. I slid the 3-carat diamond ring off my finger. It was the ring Donovan bought using funds he had secretly embezzled from a regional teacher's pension plan. I placed it gently on the cold marble. Next to it, I placed the black platinum credit card he loved to hold over my head like a weapon. I had quietly deactivated that exact card from the primary account portal 10 minutes ago while sitting at the Thanksgiving table. He just did not know it yet. Donovan stood at the top of the stairs, leaning aggressively over the wooden banister. He let out another loud, arrogant laugh. "Leave the card, Meredith. Let us see exactly how far you get. You will be calling me, begging to come back before the sun even comes up. I will make you crawl back into this house on your hands and knees." I opened the heavy front door, letting a freezing November wind sweep into the warm foyer. I did not look back. I carried my son and rolled my bags down the long paved driveway away from the sprawling mansion. A black luxury SUV was already waiting at the curb, its engine humming quietly in the dark. The driver stepped out quickly, taking my luggage and opening the back door for me with professional efficiency. I settled into the dark leather seat, strapping Leo safely into his car seat and wrapping a warm blanket around him. He fell asleep almost instantly, lulled by the motion of the vehicle. As the driver pulled away from the toxic estate and merged onto the highway, heading straight toward John F. Kennedy International Airport, I reached into my bag. I pulled out a secure, encrypted mobile phone that Donovan did not even know existed. I opened a direct messaging line to my handler at the Federal Bureau. I stared at the screen for a brief moment, feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. With a steady hand, I typed a single decisive message: "Execute, Protocol Vanguard, freeze it all." The sanctuary of the JFK First Class Lounge offered a sharp contrast to the suffocating opulence of Patricia's dining room. Here the lighting was muted, and the only sounds were the soft clinking of porcelain coffee cups and the hushed murmurs of international travelers. I settled Leo onto a plush velvet sofa. He was fast asleep, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, completely unaware that our entire universe had just shifted. Across the glass coffee table, My phone vibrated with violent persistence. It had not stopped shaking since I stepped out of the black SUV. I picked up the device. I had 84 missed calls and over 200 text messages. They were a predictable mix of rage and delusion. Donovan was unraveling in real time. His messages shifted rapidly from aggressive commands to patronizing threats. "Bring my son back this instant. You do not have a single dollar to your name. You will be crawling back to me by sunrise. You cannot survive without my money." Patricia's texts were even more venomous. She called me an unstable thief and promised she was already calling her police commissioner friend to have me arrested for kidnapping. She assured me I would spend the rest of my life in a prison cell while she raised my son properly. I read their panicked words and felt absolutely nothing. No fear, no regret. I only felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. They were entirely convinced I was a helpless, dependent housewife fleeing into the night with no resources. They had spent 5 years mocking my freelance bookkeeping business, believing I was scraping together pennies from local bakeries. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. A different phone buzzed in my coat pocket. It was a secure, encrypted device Donovan did not even know I possessed. I answered it immediately. A crisp, professional voice with a slight Swiss accent greeted me. "Good morning, Meredith. Protocol Vanguard is fully active." It was Marcus, my lead wealth manager at a private bank in Geneva. I asked him for a status update on my accounts. Marcus confirmed that my entire portfolio was secure and completely isolated from the United States banking system. Over the past 3 years, my anonymous forensic auditing contracts with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission had been incredibly lucrative. The feds paid massive bounties for the kind of complex financial decoding I provided. I had quietly amassed a net worth of over $12 million, all safely legally hidden behind blind trusts and offshore holding companies. Donovan thought he controlled my purse strings. In reality, I could have bought his entire arrogant family 3 times over. I had been ready to leave him for months. I had the money, the passports, and the legal strategy in place. I was simply waiting for the final piece of the puzzle. I needed irrefutable proof of Donovan's ultimate crime. I needed to map the exact route his firm used to launder money for an international organized crime syndicate. That final massive wire transfer happened just hours ago, while Patricia was throwing dirty napkins at me across the Thanksgiving table. The encrypted hard drive in my bag was the nail in their collective coffin. I had what I needed, and I was finally free. Marcus asked if I needed him to arrange private security upon my arrival in the United Kingdom. I told him it would not be necessary yet, but instructed him to monitor the financial wires from Donovan's firm closely. I knew the moment the feds executed my data package, the fallout would be catastrophic. I ended the call and tucked the secure phone back into my pocket. The overhead speaker chimed with a soft, pleasant voice, announcing the final boarding call for British Airways Flight 114 with nonstop service to London Heathrow. I stood up and gently lifted Leo into my arms. He stirred slightly, burying his face into my neck, but remained deeply asleep. I grabbed my bags and walked toward the lounge exit. Before stepping out into the main terminal, I looked down at the primary cell phone Donovan paid for. The screen lit up again with another furious incoming call from my husband. I knew exactly what was on this phone. A hidden tracking application Donovan had forced me to install 2 years ago, claiming it was for my own safety in the city. He used it to monitor my every move, ensuring I was always exactly where I was supposed to be. I unlocked the screen, navigated to the core settings, and executed a complete factory reset, wiping every trace of my digital footprint. I walked over to a stainless steel trash receptacle near the boarding gate and dropped the expensive device inside. It hit the bottom with a satisfying thud. The tether was officially cut. I handed my boarding pass to the gate agent and walked down the jet bridge. As I settled into my spacious first-class pod, the flight attendants secured the cabin doors. The massive engines roared to life, pushing the plane back from the gate. I watched the glittering lights of New York City through the small oval window. The plane accelerated down the runway, pushing me back into my seat before lifting smoothly into the dark sky. It was exactly 6 o'clock in the morning on Black Friday. Thousands of miles below me in the sprawling Hamptons estate, the sky was just beginning to lighten. The remnants of the ruined Thanksgiving dinner still sat on the dining room table. Donovan was pacing furiously across the hardwood floor of his private study. His eyes were bloodshot from a sleepless night of drinking and raging at his deactivated phone. He was waiting for the local police to return his calls. He was waiting for me to surrender. Suddenly, his office phone rang. He snatched it off the receiver, expecting his high-priced lawyer or a subservient police captain. Instead, he heard the trembling, panicked voice of the senior vice president from his primary financial institution. The executive did not offer pleasantries. He was breathing heavily, his voice tight with absolute terror. "Sir, we have a massive situation. A severe federal mandate just hit our main servers. I do not know what is going on, but every single corporate and personal account linked to your family equity firm has just been completely frozen." Donovan stood completely frozen. The mahogany phone receiver slipped from his hand and hit the Persian rug with a dull thud. Frozen. The word echoed in his skull like a physical blow. He sprinted out of his study, completely ignoring the mess of extravagant Thanksgiving leftovers still rotting on the formal dining table. He grabbed his laptop from the kitchen island and aggressively hammered his password into the keyboard. He logged into his primary offshore banking portal. Access denied. He frantically tried the secondary corporate accounts. Access denied. Bright red warning banners flashed across his screen, citing immediate federal injunctions and asset seizures. Patricia strutted into the kitchen, wearing a silk designer robe, holding her own phone. She looked furious rather than frightened. She loudly ordered Donovan to tell his useless assistant to call American Express immediately. She slapped her heavy platinum card onto the granite counter, complaining that she just tried to order her morning private espresso service, and the application told her the card was suspended. She arrogantly assumed someone had stolen her identity. "It is not identity theft," Mother Donovan choked out while staring blankly at the glowing red screens. "The federal government just locked everything down." Before Patricia could even process the magnitude of those words, Donovan felt his second cell phone vibrate. It was his head of building security located in Manhattan. The guard was breathing heavily into the receiver, reporting that 6 black suburban vehicles had just aggressively parked on the sidewalk outside their corporate headquarters. Men in dark windbreakers, with the letters SEC plastered across their backs, were currently marching through the glass lobby, armed with federal warrants and local police escorts. "Get to the Home Office right now!" Donovan yelled, pushing violently past his mother. "We need to destroy the physical ledgers." They locked themselves inside the soundproof mahogany study. Donovan dragged a heavy industrial shredder from the coat closet, while Patricia frantically pulled thick leather binders from a hidden wall safe concealed behind an oil painting. The sheer panic in their voices fully exposed the absolute rot at the core of their wealth. "If they find the Cayman Island transfers, we are looking at 20 years in a federal prison." Patricia gasped violently, shoving stacks of paper into the grinding metal teeth of the machine. "You told me the shell companies were untraceable. You promised me the cartel money was perfectly washed through the commercial real estate buys." "It was untraceable," Donovan shouted back, his perfectly styled hair now matted to his sweating forehead. He aggressively typed on a secondary secure tablet, trying to route emergency backup funds to a clean burner account. He suddenly froze. The blood completely drained from his face and his hands began to shake uncontrollably. "What is it?" Patricia demanded, stepping away from the loud shredder. $15 million is gone," Donovan whispered, staring at the tablet screen in pure, unfiltered terror. "Not frozen by the government. Gone. Routed entirely out of our master holding account at 4 in the morning." Patricia dropped a massive stack of incriminatory papers onto the floor. She demanded to know who had the authorization to move that kind of capital. Donovan darted his eyes toward the heavy wooden door. Only 2 people had the master encryption keys, him and his brother-in-law, Kendrick. But Kendrick did not have the offshore routing numbers. Donovan bolted out of the study and sprinted up the grand staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. He burst into the master bedroom fully prepared to demand Meredith give him her laptop so he could check the domestic accounts. The large bed was perfectly made. The closet doors stood wide open, exposing a massive empty space where Meredith kept her clothes and luggage. Leo and his crib in the adjoining nursery were gone with all the blankets stripped away. Donovan ran back downstairs to the grand entryway. There, sitting exactly where she had left them the night before, were her expensive diamond wedding ring and the deactivated joint credit card. She planned this. Donovan breathed out as a terrifying realization washed over his entire body. The quiet, obedient housewife, the woman who supposedly balanced checkbooks for local bakeries, had just dismantled his entire global empire. She had somehow found the master ledger and triggered the federal raid. Patricia came up behind him and saw the wedding ring resting on the marble table. She screamed that the ungrateful trash had stolen their money. She ordered Donovan to call the police and have her arrested immediately. Donovan felt his narcissistic survival instincts kick in. He knew if he admitted the missing money belonged to a violent cartel, he was a dead man. He needed to control the public narrative instantly. He grabbed his phone and dialed emergency services, reporting a frantic situation. He claimed his mentally unstable, estranged wife had suffered a violent psychotic break. He told the dispatcher she had stolen $15 million from his family business and kidnapped his 3-year-old son. While the police dispatched units to his home, Donovan opened his social media accounts. He recorded a tearful, desperate video playing the role of a completely heartbroken father. He begged the public to help find his beautiful son, claiming Meredith was broke, delusional, and highly dangerous. He posted the video, watching the view count skyrocket into the millions within minutes as his followers shared the tragic story. Across the Atlantic Ocean, a sleek black town car pulled up to a luxury penthouse overlooking the River Thames in London. Meredith stepped out of the vehicle carrying Leo, who was happily eating a warm pastry. They rode the private elevator up to the top floor, stepping into a massive, sunlight-filled living room. Meredith turned on the massive flat-screen television mounted on the wall. International news channels were already broadcasting the breaking story. Donovan, with a tear-stained face, filled the screen, accompanied by dramatic banners reading, "High Society Kidnapping," and "Billionaire Heir Pleads for Stolen Son." The news anchors somberly reported that an international manhunt was underway for a broke, desperate mother. Meredith did not feel a single ounce of panic. She walked over to the marble kitchen island and poured herself a glass of sparkling water. She took a sip and smiled a genuine, radiant smile. She reached into her leather tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of official legal documents printed on heavy premium paper. The top page was an emergency international relocation order, granting Meredith absolute sole physical and legal custody of Leo. It also contained a sweeping protective injunction against Donovan and his entire family, citing imminent physical danger and ongoing federal financial investigations. The document was entirely airtight. It was signed, sealed, and fully authorized by a highly respected United States Supreme Court judge. It was the exact same powerful judge Donovan constantly bragged about playing golf with. It was the very man Donovan proudly claimed was bought and paid for by his family firm. Donovan thought his wealth made him untouchable. He had no idea Meredith had provided that very same judge with the absolute proof he needed to save his own reputation and throw Donovan directly to the wolves. Donovan dropped the phone. The dial tone hummed loudly until Patricia snatched the receiver and slammed it down onto the base. The bank had frozen everything. The federal agents were tearing through their Manhattan headquarters at this exact moment. The $15 million from the cartel was completely gone. Donovan looked at his mother, his chest heaving with uncontrollable panic. They needed a sacrificial lamb immediately. If they took the fall for the missing cartel funds, they would be dead before the trial even started. If the federal government traced the money laundering directly to them, they would spend the rest of their lives in a concrete cell. Patricia did not even blink. Her face hardened into a mask of pure, ruthless survival. She looked at her son and uttered a single name: Kendrick. Kendrick was the chief financial officer. He was the brilliant mastermind who actually ran the daily operations of the firm while Donovan played golf and took the credit. He was also the ultimate outsider. Patricia had spent the last 3 years making passive-aggressive comments about his background, masking her deep-seated prejudice behind backhanded compliments. She treated the Ivy League-educated financial genius like a highly paid servant who should simply be grateful to sit at their pristine dining table. Now he was going to be their perfect insurance policy. The heavy oak doors of the study swung open. Brittany walked in, wearing her silk pajamas, her diamond bracelets clinking against her wrists. She demanded to know why everyone was screaming at 6 in the morning. Donovan did not sugarcoat the terrifying reality of their situation. He told his sister that the feds were currently ripping their corporate offices apart, and $15 million of extremely dangerous cartel money was missing. He told her they were going to pin the entire massive fraud on her husband. He explained that Kendrick had the highest level security clearance, and his electronic signature was automatically attached to thousands of domestic routing documents. If they handed him over to the authorities, it would buy the family enough time to escape the cartel and protect her multi-million-dollar trust fund. Brittany did not cry. She did not defend the man she had married. She did not show a single ounce of loyalty to the husband who worked 80-hour weeks just to fund her lavish lifestyle. She simply crossed her arms, leaned against the mahogany bookshelf, and asked if framing him would actually work. Donovan assured her it would be a flawless setup. Brittany nodded, stating coldly that she would file for divorce by noon and publicly claim she had absolutely no idea her husband was a criminal mastermind. Donovan immediately went to work at his desk. He opened his master terminal and initiated a total system override. He typed frantically, executing emergency protocols that stripped Kendrick of all administrative privileges. Within 60 seconds, Kendrick was entirely locked out of the firm's servers. Donovan then initiated a targeted data dump, pulling selected isolated files that completely implicated Kendrick in the domestic money movements, while permanently scrubbing his own administrative footprint from the network. The frame job was hasty, but it would be enough to give the federal agents exactly what they wanted: a highly placed executive to parade in front of the hungry media. Donovan picked up his desk phone. He dialed the direct line for the Federal Task Force tip line. He modulated his voice, injecting the perfect amount of betrayal and shock. He identified himself as the vice president of the firm and stated he was calling to report a massive internal theft. He claimed he had just discovered his chief financial officer, Kendrick, had been running a highly sophisticated shadow ledger to embezzle funds. He told the federal agent that Kendrick was currently asleep at their Hamptons estate, and they needed to send tactical units immediately before he realized he was caught and tried to flee the country. 2 floors above the study, Kendrick was sitting on the edge of the guest bed. His high-powered laptop rested on his knees. His phone had been vibrating wildly for the past 20 minutes, with automated security alerts from their Manhattan servers. He had tried to log into the main corporate portal to see why the advanced firewalls were being breached. A bright red error message flashed across his screen, indicating his administrative credentials had been permanently revoked by the primary owner. Kendrick was a genius with numbers and patterns. It took him exactly 10 seconds to connect the dots. The unannounced server raid, the sudden revocation of his access, the hushed, frantic shouting he had heard echoing from the study down the hall earlier. Donovan and Patricia were offering him up on a silver platter. They were going to bury him under a mountain of falsified evidence to save their own skins. As an African-American man, facing a biased justice system and a highly publicized federal financial crime, he knew he was looking at 20 years in a maximum security prison. He would be the perfect scapegoat for a corrupt family with unlimited resources and powerful political connections. He stood up, pacing the room like a trapped animal. He heard the distant wail of police sirens echoing down the coastal highway. They were coming for him right now. He needed an exit strategy instantly. He remembered a quiet conversation he had with Meredith exactly 1 month ago in the kitchen. She had warned him that Patricia would gladly throw him to the wolves the moment the firm faced any real scrutiny. He had dismissed her warning, thinking his unparalleled financial brilliance made him indispensable to the family. Meredith had looked at him with profound pity and slipped a small black burner phone into his coat pocket, telling him to use it only when the walls finally closed in. Kendrick rushed to his leather travel bag, tearing through his neatly packed clothes. He found the small device hidden deep in the lining. He powered it on and hit the only programmed contact number on the screen. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered through the secure, encrypted line. Meredith sat in her London penthouse, looking out at the River Thames. She answered the phone with a calm, steady voice. "I told you they would burn you, Kendrick. Are you ready to burn them back?" Kendrick was breathing so heavily over the encrypted connection that Meredith could hear the rattling hum of a cheap motel air conditioning unit vibrating in the background. He did not answer her question immediately. Instead, his voice cracked with a mixture of terror and misplaced anger. "You took it!" he accused, his words tumbling out in a panicked rush. "I saw the morning news, Meredith. You stole $15 million from the family accounts and kidnapped your own son. You brought the federal government down on all of us to cover your tracks. Donovan told me everything right before the servers locked me out. He said you had a psychotic break." Meredith took a slow sip of her sparkling water, looking out over the Thames. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her tone was absolute ice. "Stop talking, Kendrick, and listen to me very carefully. You are currently sitting on a sagging mattress in a roadside motel, terrified out of your mind. Your wife, Brittany, is sleeping soundly in a multi-million-dollar mansion, knowing she just signed your life away to protect her trust fund. Donovan did not lock you out of those servers because of a security breach. He locked you out so he could hand your electronic signature directly to the FBI. Kendrick let out a sharp, breathless laugh. "That is a lie. Donovan is an arrogant jerk, but Brittany is my wife. She would never let them set me up." Meredith set her glass down on the marble counter. She let a heavy silence hang over the line, forcing Kendrick to sit with his own denial. "Do you remember Thanksgiving dinner last year, Kendrick? Do you remember when Patricia spent 20 minutes loudly complaining about the crime rates in your childhood neighborhood, implying you were just a charity case they allowed to sit at their pristine mahogany table? Brittany sat right next to you, swirling her vintage wine, and laughed right along with them. She did not defend you. She never defends you. I was the only person who poured you a fresh drink and told you that you deserved better. They do not view you as family, Kendrick. You are their workhorse. You are a highly paid scapegoat who does not come from their world. They brought you in specifically because they needed someone expendable when the cartel money finally triggered an alarm." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The word cartel hung in the air, instantly shattering whatever delusions Kendrick was desperately trying to cling to. "You do not know anything about the firm accounts, Meredith. You do basic bookkeeping for local bakeries. You do not understand what is happening right now." "I know exactly what is happening," Meredith replied, her voice echoing with clinical precision. "I know about the dummy corporation registered in Belize. I know about the shell companies operating out of the Cayman Islands. I know that Donovan has been masking violent cartel funds through commercial real estate acquisitions, using your administrative credentials to authorize the domestic wire transfers. And I know that exactly $15 million was routed out of the master holding account at 4 o'clock this morning." Kendrick choked back the sob. "How do you know about the Belize accounts? Only the executive board has that routing data." "Because I am not a freelance bookkeeper, Kendrick. I am a senior forensic auditor working directly for the federal government." The revelation hit the encrypted line with the force of a physical blow. Kendrick stopped pacing. The rattling air conditioner was the only sound bridging the gap between London and the dingy American motel room. "I have spent the last 3 years tracking every single illegal wire transfer Donovan and Patricia authorized," Meredith continued relentlessly. "I mapped their entire money laundering syndicate. The federal raid happening at your corporate headquarters right now is my data package in action. The $15 million is not stolen. It was seized by the federal government under Protocol Vanguard. Donovan knows he is looking at a lifetime in federal prison, so he just called the FBI tip line and reported you as the sole mastermind behind the entire fraud operation. They are coming for you, Kendrick. You are looking at a 20-year sentence while your wife files for divorce and plays the oblivious victim. Kendrick let out a ragged, desperate breath. The reality of his situation crashed down on him, obliterating the last remaining fragments of his loyalty to the family that had just sold him to the slaughter. He had spent years working 80-hour weeks fixing Donovan's massive financial blunders, covering up Patricia's reckless spending, and treating Brittany like a queen. His reward was a calculated frame job. "They set me up," he whispered, his voice breaking completely. Brittany knew. She had to know. She knew Meredith confirmed ruthlessly, and she did not care. "But you have an out. You have two choices right now. You can hang up this phone, wait for the FBI tactical team to kick down that motel door, and spend the best years of your life in a maximum security prison. Or you can become my inside man. You help me systematically dismantle Donovan and Patricia from the inside out, and I guarantee you full federal immunity. You walk away completely clean." Kendrick did not hesitate. The lingering affection for his wife was entirely dead, replaced by a burning, desperate need to survive and a sudden, furious desire for retribution. "What do you need me to do?" Meredith smiled. The trap was perfectly set. "You need to get back into the corporate headquarters before the Securities and Exchange Commission cordons off the executive suite. They are locking down the lobby, but the private freight elevator in the underground parking garage operates on a separate analog grid. Take the service stairs directly to your corner office." Kendrick was moving now, grabbing his jacket and his car keys. "I am locked out of the network, Meredith. I cannot access the servers to give you the proof you need." "I do not need you to access the network," Meredith replied, her voice dripping with absolute authority. "I need you to get under it. Go to your desk. Pry up the loose hardwood floorboard located directly beneath your leather chair. Waiting in the hollow space between the joists is a secondary secure burner phone and a silver encrypted flash drive. That drive contains the unredacted master ledger with Donovan's personal digital signature attached to every single cartel transfer. Secure that drive, Kendrick, and we will burn their entire empire to the ground." Kendrick dropped to his knees and jammed his fingers into the microscopic gap between the polished oak floorboards beneath his desk. He pulled upward with all his strength. The wood groaned and snapped loose. Resting in the dark hollow space between the joists was a heavy silver flash drive and a sleek black smartphone. He snatched them up and shoved them deep into his jacket pocket. The heavy thud of a battering ram echoed from the main lobby doors 2 floors below. Kendrick did not hesitate. He sprinted for the private service stairwell, slipping into the shadows just as a team of armed federal agents flooded the executive suite. While Kendrick vanished into the chaotic labyrinth of the Manhattan subway system, Donovan and Patricia were already executing the next phase of their survival strategy. They understood that the court of public opinion was just as critical as the court of law. The studio lights of the most watched morning talk show in America were blindingly bright. Donovan sat on a plush velvet sofa, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees. He looked appropriately devastated. His normally immaculate hair was slightly disheveled, and he wore a simple dark suit, devoid of his usual flashy accessories. Patricia sat beside him, clutching a tissue, playing the role of the heartbroken matriarch to absolute perfection. Donovan looked directly into the camera and let a single manufactured tear track down his cheek. He told the sympathetic host that his heart was entirely shattered. He painted a masterful, horrifying picture. He claimed Kendrick was a malignant narcissist and an embezzling criminal mastermind who had been draining the family company for years. But the most venomous lies were reserved for his wife. Donovan stated with a trembling voice that Kendrick had preyed upon Meredith, exploiting her fragile mental state to orchestrate the theft of $15 million. He called Meredith a deranged, unstable woman who had kidnapped his beloved son in a moment of pure drug-induced psychosis. Patricia dabbed at her dry eyes and nodded tragically. She told the national audience that they had tried for years to get Meredith psychiatric help, but her delusions had finally consumed her. They begged the public to help bring their grandson home safely. This performance was not a new tactic for the family. It was their standard operating procedure. 5 years ago, when a senior accountant discovered anomalies in their offshore tax filings, Patricia had deployed their massive wealth to utterly destroy the woman. They hired a ruthless public relations firm to plant fabricated stories in the tabloids, painting the whistleblower as a disgruntled, unstable corporate spy. The accountant was blacklisted from the industry and forced to flee the state. Donovan and Patricia knew exactly how to weaponize their pristine high society facade to crush anyone who threatened their empire. Wealth bought influence and influence bought truth. The broadcast worked flawlessly. Within hours, the carefully orchestrated smear campaign caught fire across the internet. Social media platforms exploded with armchair detectives branding Meredith an unfit, dangerous mother. News anchors debated Kendrick's supposed criminal genius. The public narrative shifted violently, turning Donovan into a tragic victim and painting Meredith and Kendrick as greedy, unhinged fugitives. Sitting in his temporary high-security office, Donovan watched the social media metrics climb with deep, vicious satisfaction. The FBI was currently chasing ghosts. The public was entirely on his side. He felt absolutely invincible. He opened his laptop and drafted a direct email to the senior partner of the prestigious London law firm representing Meredith. He abandoned the Grieving Father Act entirely. The message was dripping with pure toxic hubris. He demanded the immediate return of the $15 million and the unconditional surrender of full physical custody of his son. He gave her a hard deadline of 24 hours. He explicitly stated that if she did not comply, he would leverage his political connections to have Interpol issue a red notice hunting her and Kendrick down like feral dogs. He promised to ensure Meredith spent the rest of her life in a federal psychiatric ward, while Kendrick rotted in a maximum security supermax facility. He hit send and leaned back in his leather chair, waiting for the inevitable white flag of surrender. Donovan waited for hours. He refreshed his inbox compulsively, expecting a panicked capitulation from the London attorneys. Nothing arrived. Then his personal secure cell phone vibrated on the glass desk. It was not an email from the legal team. It was a direct encrypted text message from an unknown blocked number. Donovan snatched the phone and opened the message. There was no text. There were no demands. It was simply a high-definition video file. He pressed play. The video was crystal clear security footage captured from a hidden camera positioned directly above his own desk in his soundproof mahogany study back at the estate. The timestamp in the corner read exactly 6:14 that morning. Donovan watched his own face appear on the screen. He watched himself frantically hammering at his master terminal, initiating the total system override to lock Kendrick out of the corporate servers. The camera angle was perfectly positioned, capturing the exact keystrokes as Donovan deliberately planted the fabricated cartel money laundering files directly onto Kendrick's user profile. The video showed Patricia standing in the background, calmly shredding the physical evidence, while Donovan orchestrated the digital frame job. The video looped seamlessly. Donovan sat frozen in his chair. The blood completely drained from his face and his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Meredith had not just secured the master ledger, she had completely compromised his home network. She had recorded the exact moment he committed federal obstruction of justice and cyber fraud. The untouchable billionaire suddenly realized he was not the predator. He was the prey. Donovan hurled the burner phone against the bulletproof glass of his office window. The screen shattered into a spiderweb of cracks, but the video kept looping in his mind. Meredith was not just a disgruntled wife. She was a ghost in his machine. She had eyes inside his most secure sanctuaries. If she had the footage of him framing Kendrick, she had the power to put him away for life. But she needed the physical flash drive to make the charges stick. Donovan slammed his fist down on the intercom button, dialing his head of private security. He did not ask for the police. He called for his personal fixers. The men he kept on retainer to make catastrophic problems permanently disappear. He ordered them to lock down the city block and find Kendrick before the FBI could get their hands on him. Deep inside the subterranean levels of the corporate headquarters, Kendrick heard the distinct heavy thud of tactical boots echoing down the concrete stairwell. He gripped the silver flash drive and the black burner phone tightly in his sweating hand. These were not federal agents. Federal agents announced their presence. These men moved with the silent, lethal precision of mercenaries. Donovan had sent a hit squad. Kendrick had spent the last decade wearing tailored Tom Ford suits and sipping scotch in mahogany boardrooms. But before the Ivy League scholarships, he was just a kid surviving the unforgiving streets of South Side Chicago. He knew exactly how wealthy predators hunted. They looked for panicked executives trying to hail black cars or fleeing toward luxury hotels. They looked for men who acted like they had something to lose. Kendrick stripped off his $3,000 suit jacket and tossed it behind an industrial dumpster. He unclasped his heavy platinum watch and dropped it into a storm drain. He pushed through the heavy metal doors of the loading dock and stepped out into the chaotic crush of the Manhattan streets. He found a homeless man huddled near a subway grate and traded his silk tie and gold cufflinks for a stained, oversized canvas jacket. Pulling the hood low over his face, Kendrick instantly transformed from a chief financial officer into a ghost. The black burner phone vibrated in his pocket. A secure text message flashed across the screen from Meredith. "They are monitoring your bank accounts and tracking your facial recognition through the city grid. I just wired 50,000 in untraceable cryptocurrency to this device. Get to Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. Hangar 4. You have 40 minutes before Donovan's men lock down the bridges." Kendrick moved fast, keeping his head down and avoiding the glare of street cameras. He ducked into a crowded bodega and used the digital wallet to purchase a prepaid debit card, withdrawing a massive stack of untraceable cash. When he emerged, he saw two black SUVs aggressively mount the curb at the end of the block. Men in dark windbreakers poured out, scanning the crowd with terrifying efficiency. Kendrick did not run. Running drew attention. He utilized the cash in his hand. He flagged down a passing bicycle courier delivering food. He slapped $500 onto the man's handlebars and demanded the electric bike and the heavy insulated delivery backpack. The courier happily walked away. Kendrick threw the bulky square backpack over his shoulders, mounted the bike, and pedaled directly into the chaotic flow of oncoming traffic. He wove through the gridlocked grid of taxis and delivery trucks, completely bypassing the frantic security teams searching the sidewalks. He rode hard, pushing the electric motor to its absolute limit, dodging angry pedestrians and blasting through red lights. He ditched the bike near Penn Station and plunged into the subterranean transit hub. The cat-and-mouse game escalated violently. Donovan's fixers were patrolling the turnstiles, their eyes darting across the sea of commuters. Kendrick pulled his hood lower. He waited for an express train to arrive, triggering a massive surge of angry, rushed bodies pouring out of the cars. Using the aggressive crowd as a human shield, Kendrick drove his shoulders forward, slipping right past a mercenary checking faces. He dove into the train car just as the metal doors slammed shut, trapping the furious security guard on the platform. An hour later, a sleek, unmarked private jet sat idling on the tarmac at a private New Jersey airfield. The engines were whining with barely contained power. Kendrick sprinted across the wet asphalt, his lungs burning. The pilot stood at the bottom of the folding stairs, frantically waving him forward. Kendrick scrambled up the steps, diving into the plush leather interior. He heard the heavy cabin door seal shut behind him. As the jet aggressively taxied down the runway, Kendrick looked out the circular window. 3 black SUVs crashed through the chain-link gate of the hangar, speeding wildly toward the tarmac. They were exactly 2 minutes too late. The plane lifted into the clouds, leaving Donovan's assassins stranded on the ground. The flight across the Atlantic was a blur of exhausted adrenaline. When the black town car finally deposited Kendrick outside a towering glass skyscraper in London, he felt like a man waking up from a decade-long nightmare. He rode the private elevator to the top floor. The doors parted with a soft chime. Meredith stood in the center of the sprawling, sunlight-filled penthouse. She was not the meek, obedient housewife who politely arranged charity galas. She stood with the rigid, calculating posture of a federal predator. "You made it," she said, offering a tight, professional smile. "Do you have the ledger?" Kendrick reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy silver flash drive. He walked across the Persian rug and placed it gently onto the marble kitchen island. He looked at the woman he had known for years, realizing he had never actually known her at all. "I have it," he breathed out, his voice hoarse and trembling. "But you need to understand exactly what you are holding, Meredith. You think Donovan was just embezzling from hedge funds and wealthy investors. You think this is just a standard corporate fraud case? Meredith frowned, her eyes locking onto his. What are you talking about? Kendrick leaned heavily against the counter, the absolute terror of his reality finally catching up to him. They did not just steal from investors, Meredith. The $15 million they washed through those dummy corporations today, they stole from a cartel, and Donovan just told the federal government that I am the one who took it. Meredith did not flinch. She took the heavy silver flash drive from the marble kitchen island and walked directly to her secure workstation overlooking the glittering London skyline. She slid the drive into a reinforced port and began typing with blistering speed. The glowing screens illuminated the dark penthouse, casting sharp shadows across her focused features. The encryption protecting the drive was military grade, but Meredith was a senior federal auditor who specialized in breaking black market financial networks. She bypassed Donovan's pathetic corporate firewall within 20 minutes. The primary monitor instantly flooded with thousands of highly classified routing numbers, shell company profiles, and offshore wire transfers. Kendrick pulled up a heavy leather chair beside her, his eyes tracking the cascading lines of raw data. He pointed to a recurring alphanumeric code buried deep in the commercial real estate acquisitions. It was a notoriously violent syndicate operating out of Sinaloa. Donovan had been washing their blood money through luxury high-rise developments in Manhattan for the past 2 years. The tension in the room thickened into something completely suffocating. If the cartel realized $15 million was frozen by the federal government, they would not file a civil lawsuit. They would send heavily armed hit squads to wipe out everyone connected to the firm. Kendrick wiped cold sweat from his forehead, realizing how close he had come to taking the fall for a syndicate that routinely dismembered people who crossed them. He leaned closer to the secondary monitor, his hands shaking as he pulled up the internal domestic transfers. He needed to see exactly how Donovan had staged the missing funds to point the federal agents in his direction. He navigated to the supposedly secure family trust accounts and suddenly froze. He opened his personal investment portfolio and his breath hitched. The screen showed a zero balance. Every single dollar of his personal savings, his vested stock options, and his retirement fund had been completely liquidated and routed into a dummy corporation 3 days ago. The authorization signature belonged to Brittany. She had not just agreed to frame him to save herself from prison. She had systematically drained his entire life savings to temporarily plug the massive hole Donovan had created in the cartel ledger. She had sacrificed her husband to buy her brother a few extra days of breathing room. The sheer cruelty of the betrayal hit Kendrick like a physical blow. He had spent his entire marriage providing for a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a disposable bank account. He stared at the empty ledger, realizing he had absolutely nothing left to lose. Meredith pushed a cup of black coffee into his hand, forcing him to focus on the screens. They dug deeper into the central ledger, tracing the communication logs hidden in the transaction memos. The cartel was not waiting for an explanation regarding the frozen assets. They had issued a hard, unyielding deadline. Donovan had exactly until the end of the month to deliver the washed funds, or the syndicate was going to systematically execute the entire executive board, starting with his mother. Kendrick stared at the glowing red deadline on the screen. He asked how Donovan possibly planned to generate $15 million in clean, untraceable cash in less than 2 weeks, with the federal government watching his every move and his primary accounts frozen by the authorities. Meredith did not answer immediately. She pulled up a heavily encrypted secondary file isolated from the main corporate accounts. It was an expedited payout schedule from a highly secretive offshore insurance firm. She broke the password and opened the policy documents. Donovan had secretly taken out a massive life insurance policy on Meredith exactly 6 months ago. The guaranteed payout in the event of her accidental or tragic death was exactly $15 million. Meredith stared at her own death warrant. He had orchestrated the entire public narrative of her being a deranged, unstable kidnapper, so that when she inevitably turned up dead, it would look like a tragic conclusion to a violent psychotic break. Donovan was not just trying to frame her for the theft to save his reputation. He was actively planning to have her murdered to pay off a cartel debt. Kendrick pushed his chair back in absolute horror, realizing the depth of the monster he had been working for. He told Meredith they needed to call her superiors at the Federal Bureau immediately and hand over the flash drive. He insisted the FBI could place them both in protective custody before Donovan sent his private fixers across the Atlantic to finish the job. Meredith closed the insurance file. Her eyes were completely cold, devoid of any panic or fear. She looked at Kendrick and stated that simply putting Donovan in a federal prison was no longer enough. The cartel would just bribe a guard to kill him, and Patricia would find a way to shield the remaining family assets through her endless web of offshore trusts. They would ultimately survive the scandal and find a way to strike back. Meredith wanted them completely bankrupt, stripped of their power and begging for mercy. She opened a highly restricted federal routing application on her secondary monitor. She typed in the specific Cayman Island account number Donovan used to pay his personal fixers and initiated a direct irrevocable transfer of $50 million straight from the cartel's primary holding account. She was actively moving the syndicate's money into Donovan's personal assassination fund. She hit execute and watched the transfer clear. She was baiting a trap that Donovan could not possibly escape. The $50 million transfer into Donovan's assassination fund was only the primer. Meredith needed a kill shot. She let her fingers dance across the glowing keyboard, opening a secondary encrypted tunnel directly into the European banking registry. Kendrick watched in stunned silence as she began constructing a digital phantom from scratch. She created a shell corporation registered in Cyprus, listing Kendrick as the sole beneficiary. She then routed exactly $15 million into the newly formed account. But this was not cartel money. This was a highly classified federal trace fund. Every single digital cent was tagged with a cryptographic watermark, completely invisible to standard banking software, but screaming like a beacon on federal monitoring systems. It was the digital equivalent of exploding die packs in a bank robbery. "We cannot just hand the ledger to the authorities," Meredith explained, her voice clinical and precise. "If Donovan gets wind of a federal indictment before he is in handcuffs, Patricia will have him on a private jet to a non-extradition country within the hour. They have contingency plans for everything. We need him to voluntarily step into a trap that locks from the outside." She deliberately fractured the encryption on the Cyprus account and dropped a breadcrumb trail of login ping requests directly onto the main server logs of the family firm in Manhattan. She knew Donovan's tech team was currently tearing the corporate network apart, desperate to find any trace of Kendrick's movements. She left the digital door unlocked and slightly ajar, deliberately pointing an arrow straight toward the money. Back in the Manhattan executive suite, the atmosphere was toxic and suffocating. Donovan was pacing the length of his massive office, his silk tie discarded and his custom shirt sleeves rolled up. The cartel's deadline was a guillotine hanging directly over his neck. His plan to murder Meredith for the insurance payout would take weeks to execute, process, and clear the inevitable investigations. He needed liquid capital immediately, or the syndicate was going to start sending pieces of his family to the corporate lobby. His lead cybersecurity director burst through the heavy oak doors holding a tablet, his face pale. They had found it. The security team had flagged a hidden offshore account in Cyprus registered under Kendrick's name, containing exactly $15 million. Donovan snatched the tablet, his eyes scanning the raw data. A manic, triumphant grin spread across his face, completely erasing the terror of the past few hours. This was the defining fatal flaw in Donovan's psychology. He possessed an absolute blind arrogance born from a lifetime of inherited wealth and consequence-free transgressions. He firmly believed he was the smartest man in any room. He had spent his entire career bypassing regulatory boards, manipulating local politicians, and crushing competitors through sheer financial brute force. 10 years ago, he had entirely bankrupted a rival firm by hacking their internal communications and front-running their acquisitions, laughing as their executives faced federal ruin. Donovan did not look at the Cyprus account and see a highly sophisticated federal trap. He looked at it and saw Kendrick. He saw a desperate amateur from the wrong side of the tracks, clumsily trying to hide stolen funds. Donovan believed Kendrick was fundamentally inferior. That toxic superiority complex completely blinded him to the reality of the situation. Donovan violently shoved his security director aside and took control of the master terminal. Patricia stood behind his heavy leather chair, resting her hands on his shoulders, her eyes glittering with predatory excitement. "Take it all back, Donovan," she urged, her voice dripping with venomous greed. "Drain that ungrateful parasite dry and pay the syndicate today. Let Kendrick rot in whatever hole he is hiding in. We will take our money and we will crush them both." Donovan did not hesitate. He ordered the security director out of the room and locked the doors. He deliberately bypassed the standard corporate firewalls entirely. He did not want his own security team having a digital record of the upcoming transaction. Instead, he logged into his own deeply buried administrative backdoor, using a private, unsanctioned IP address that he believed was completely invisible to both his staff and the authorities. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, slicing through Meredith's intentionally weakened encryption with brutal, arrogant force. The screen flashed a vibrant green, granting him full administrative access to the Cyprus account. The $15 million balance sat there glowing in bold digits. Donovan laughed, a sharp barking sound of pure vicious victory. He highlighted the entire balance and pulled up the encrypted routing numbers for the Sinaloa syndicate. He pasted the cartel's primary receiving account into the transfer window. He was going to wipe out his lethal debt and leave Kendrick penniless in one single effortless keystroke. He slammed the enter key. The transfer protocol initiated. A blue progress bar appeared on the screen, inching steadily forward. 10%? 30%. Patricia squeezed his shoulders, her manicured nails digging into his expensive shirt. 70%? 90%? Completed. Donovan threw his hands in the air, letting out a victorious, echoing shout. Patricia clapped her hands together, a genuine smile, finally breaking through her usual icy, high society demeanor. They moved immediately to the antique crystal decanter on the mahogany sideboard, pouring 2 generous glasses of vintage scotch to toast their own untouchable brilliance. They had won. The cartel was paid. The problem was permanently solved. 3,000 miles away in the London penthouse, Meredith's primary monitor suddenly shifted from cool blue to a violent flashing crimson. Kendrick jumped out of his chair as a blaring automated alarm echoed through the quiet room. Meredith leaned back in her chair and took a slow, measured sip of her sparkling water. A terrifyingly calm smile touched the corners of her mouth. Donovan had not just stolen $15 million, he had forcefully extracted federally tagged trace funds and wired them across international borders directly into the designated bank account of a globally recognized organized crime syndicate. Furthermore, his sheer desperate arrogance had driven him to bypass his own corporate security masking protocols and initiate the transfer using his personal tracked IP address. He had just handed the federal government absolute, undeniable mathematical proof of his direct involvement with the cartel. In that exact fraction of a second, automated red alerts triggered simultaneously across the primary databases of the FBI, Interpol, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Donovan had just committed international wire fraud and funded a criminal syndicate on a live-tracked federal wiretap. The sharp staccato click of Patricia's designer heels echoed off the imported Italian marble of the Grand Foyer. She moved through the sprawling estate with the terrifying energy of a conquering general dictating orders to a terrified army of florists and caterers. She directed a team of men carrying massive arrangements of white orchids to flank the sweeping mahogany staircase. She felt utterly victorious. The digital transfer Donovan had executed hours earlier was the ultimate triumph. In her mind, the problem was entirely solved. The cartel would be paid their blood money by midnight, and Meredith would soon meet a tragic end, arranged by Donovan's highly paid fixers. Patricia believed they had weathered the storm exactly as their family always did, through sheer ruthless superiority. Now it was time to perform for the world. She had organized a lavish charity gala under the guise of an annual children's hospital fundraiser. In reality, the event was a calculated theatrical display designed to crush the swirling media rumors. By filling her home with state senators, Wall Street titans, and high society elites, Patricia intended to prove that their dynasty was completely untouched by the scandal. She paused by the champagne fountain adjusting a diamond necklace that cost more than most people earned in a decade. A group of wealthy socialites approached her, their faces masked with manufactured sympathy. "We have been praying for you, Patricia," one of the women murmured delicately, placing a hand on her arm. "The news stories have been simply dreadful." Patricia offered a tight, patronizing smile. "You know how the media loves a tragedy," she replied, her voice dripping with aristocratic condescension. "Meredith was always a deeply troubled girl. We tried to give her everything, but she simply could not handle the pressure of our world. A freelance bookkeeper from a middle-class suburb trying to play financial mastermind. It is tragic, really, but it is certainly not a threat. This house has stood on this exact foundation for 4 generations. My grandfather imported these very chandeliers from France. No hysterical ex-wife is going to shake bricks made of solid old money." She waved her hand dismissively, turning her attention back to the catering staff. She genuinely believed her own lies. She believed the Vance family name was an impenetrable fortress. She had absolutely no idea that a federal dragnet was rapidly closing around her son, or that Meredith was currently watching their entire financial empire burn to ash from a penthouse in London. By 8 o'clock, the mansion was packed with hundreds of elite guests. A string quartet played a flawless rendition of Vivaldi in the corner of the ballroom. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of beluga caviar and vintage champagne. The room hummed with the sound of clinking baccarat crystal and the low murmur of powerful people exchanging secrets. Patricia stood at the landing of the grand staircase looking down at her kingdom. She signaled the orchestra to stop playing. She took a silver spoon and tapped it against her champagne flute. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the chatter, instantly silencing the massive ballroom. Hundreds of faces turned upward to look at her. She delivered a masterful speech. She spoke about resilience and family legacy. She thanked her guests for standing by them during a painful private matter regarding her troubled daughter-in-law. She painted a picture of unshakable strength, assuring the crowd that the Vance family would continue to be the charitable pillar of the city for another 100 years. As she raised her glass for a final toast, the heavy oak double doors at the front of the mansion suddenly swung open with a violent crash. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. Patricia lowered her glass, her eyes narrowing in sheer fury at the interruption. A man strode directly into the grand foyer. He was not wearing a tuxedo. He wore a cheap beige trench coat and scuffed boots, tracking mud directly onto Patricia's priceless Persian rug. 2 of the Vance family private security guards immediately rushed forward to intercept him, grabbing his arms. The man did not struggle. He simply reached into his coat and produced a federal badge and a thick manila envelope. The security guards took one look at the badge, immediately dropped their hands, and stepped back, perfectly willing to let the man pass. The entire ballroom watched in dead, breathless silence. The man walked straight through the parting sea of billionaires and politicians. He marched up the first 3 steps of the grand staircase, stopping directly below Patricia. He held out the thick manila envelope. "Patricia Vance," he stated, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "You are formally served." Patricia stared at him, her face flushing dark red with rage. She snatched the envelope from his hand, fully intending to rip it up and order him thrown off the property. She assumed it was a desperate civil subpoena from Meredith's lawyers. She tore the top off the envelope and pulled out the heavy stack of legal documents. The seal at the top of the page did not belong to a family court. It was the official crest of the Federal Reserve Bank. Patricia's eyes scanned the bold black text at the top of the page. Her breath hitched in her throat, and the crystal champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering into 1,000 pieces on the marble steps. It was a 48-hour notice of foreclosure and eviction. She read the documents in absolute horror. The generational estate did not belong to her family. It belonged to a private shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. Donovan had secretly leveraged the entire property, taking out a massive untraceable loan against the deed to cover his initial losses to the cartel. When Donovan initiated the illegal wire transfer earlier that afternoon, attempting to pay the syndicate, He had triggered a federal asset freeze across his entire portfolio. The holding company had instantly called in the massive debt. Patricia had exactly 2 days to pack her bags and vacate the premises before federal marshals physically threw her out onto the street. The shattered crystal of the champagne flute lay glittering on the imported marble steps. The string quartet had abruptly stopped playing mid-measure, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence draped over the grand ballroom. Hundreds of New York elite politicians, socialites, and Wall Street titans stared openly at Patricia. They watched the pristine, untouchable mask of the Vance family matriarch crack and slide completely off her face. Patricia crushed the federal foreclosure document in her trembling fist, her knuckles turning white. She did not look at the process server. She locked her furious gaze on Donovan, who was standing paralyzed near the caviar station. Patricia moved with the terrifying quiet velocity of a predator. She marched down the remaining steps, grabbed her son by the bicep with a grip that bruised the bone, and dragged him down the long arched corridor toward the mahogany study. She shoved him inside and slammed the heavy oak double doors, shutting out the frantic whispers of the party guests. "You mortgaged the estate," Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with pure, unfiltered venom. "You leveraged 4 generations of our legacy to cover your filthy offshore tracks." Donovan stumbled back against his desk, raising his hands in a frantic defensive gesture. He stammered out a chaotic explanation about the asset freeze, the cartel deadlines, and the sudden lack of liquid capital. He had taken out the massive shadow loan against the property entirely in secret, assuming he could wash the syndicate money and pay it back before anyone noticed. He swore the Cayman Islands holding company was just a faceless corporate entity. He insisted they just needed to negotiate a settlement. "Fix it!" Patricia commanded, pointing a trembling finger at his chest. "You get on that phone and you fix it right now, or I swear I will hand you over to the federal agents myself." Donovan lunged for the phone on his desk, his hands shaking violently as he punched in the international contact number listed at the top of the eviction notice. He hit the speaker button so Patricia could hear. A receptionist with a crisp corporate tone answered the line. Donovan did not ask for assistance. He instantly reverted to the only tactic he knew. He bullied. "Listen to me very carefully," Donovan barked, leaning over the desk and using his most aggressive boardroom voice. "This is Donovan Vance. I do not care what computer glitch triggered this absurd foreclosure notice, but you are going to halt the process immediately. I have a team of corporate litigators who will tie your pathetic holding company up in international court for the next decade. I will personally ensure your firm is investigated, audited, and bankrupted by the end of the fiscal quarter. I want to speak directly to your chief executive officer right now." Patricia paced the length of the study, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. This was how the Vance family had always operated. They crushed opposition with overwhelming legal and financial force. They bought the people they could afford and destroyed the ones they could not. Donovan continued his aggressive tirade, threatening to leverage his political connections to ruin the holding company entirely. He demanded compliance, expecting the usual terrified capitulation from a lower-level employee. "Please hold," the receptionist replied calmly. The line went silent. Donovan looked at Patricia and offered a weak, arrogant smile. He adjusted his suit jacket, attempting to regain his shattered composure. He truly believed he had intimidated them into submission. He believed his money made him a god. The line clicked. The hold music vanished. "You are speaking to the CEO, Donovan." The voice echoing through the speakerphone was calm, clinical, and terrifyingly familiar. It lacked any trace of fear. It lacked any warmth. It was the voice of the woman Donovan had spent the morning publicly destroying on national television. Donovan froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. Patricia stopped pacing, her perfectly manicured hands flying to her mouth in absolute shock. Meredith Donovan breathed out the name like a curse. "I told you I mapped your entire money laundering syndicate, Donovan." Meredith continued, her tone conversational, but sharp as shattered glass. "When you took out a shadow mortgage against the family estate to cover the missing cartel funds, you assumed your lenders were anonymous offshore investors. You assumed nobody was watching the secondary debt markets. You were wrong." Donovan gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. You do not have the capital to buy that debt, he stammered, his mind desperately trying to reject the reality of the situation. I did not need the capital, Meredith replied smoothly. I simply provided the federal authorities with the exact routing numbers proving your collateral was tied directly to cartel money. The original lenders panicked. They dumped your toxic debt onto the market for pennies on the dollar just to distance themselves from a federal indictment. I purchased the note through a blind trust using the exact untraceable funds you so graciously left behind in your offshore accounts over the years. Patricia lunged toward the speakerphone, her voice shrill and desperate. You cannot do this, Meredith. This house has been in my family for generations. You are nothing but a freelance accountant. You cannot take my home. I already did, Patricia Meredith answered ruthlessly. I am the sole owner of the holding company that owns the deed to your legacy. Your son triggered the default clause the second he tried to wire stolen federal funds out of the country this afternoon. The transaction is final. The paperwork is filed. Donovan let out a ragged, desperate breath. The walls of his impenetrable fortress were collapsing on top of him. He was completely trapped. The cartel wanted his blood, the federal government wanted his freedom, and his ex-wife had just legally stolen the roof over his head. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate my property, Meredith stated, her voice dropping to a low, icy whisper that cut through the silence of the study. I suggest you pack lightly. The federal marshals will be arriving on Tuesday morning to escort you out. Apologize to the walls before you leave. The line went dead. The morning sun completely exposed the absolute devastation inside the Vance estate. The grand foyer, which just hours ago had hosted the most powerful politicians and financiers in the city, was now a chaotic war zone. The string quartet and champagne fountains were gone, replaced by a ruthless crew of high-end liquidators. They were systematically ripping museum-quality tapestries from the walls and wrapping generational antiques in industrial bubble wrap. Patricia was standing in the center of the main dining room, her face haggard and stripped of its usual aristocratic makeup, shrieking at a team of defense attorneys through a conference call. Down the hall, the rhythmic, violent thud of a hammer echoed from the study as Donovan desperately smashed his encrypted hard drives into unrecognizable shards of metal and silicon. The federal marshals were coming, and the Vance dynasty was currently bleeding out on its own imported marble floors. Brittany stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the collapse of her entire world. She was clutching her platinum smartphone so tightly her knuckles were white. Her husband, Kendrick, was gone. She had systematically drained his life savings and vested stock options just days ago, sacrificing him without a second thought to temporarily plug the massive hole in Donovan's cartel ledger. That betrayal was supposed to secure her golden future. It was supposed to keep her dripping in diamonds and vacationing in St. Bart's. Now there was absolutely nothing left. The money was frozen, the house was seized, the cartel was hunting them. Brittany was terrified of prison, but she was fundamentally paralyzed by the thought of being poor. Loyalty was a foreign concept to her. Survival was the only currency she recognized. She slipped away from the landing, darting into the master suite's expansive bathroom, and locked the heavy oak door behind her. She turned on the gold-plated faucets to mask the sound of her voice, and quickly dialed the international number she had memorized from Patricia's frantic notes. Meredith answered on the second ring. The line was crystal clear, entirely free of static, matching the terrifyingly calm tone of Meredith's voice. Brittany did not waste time on pleasantries or apologies. She immediately launched into a cutthroat, desperate negotiation. You have the corporate accounts and you have the house, but you do not have everything, Meredith. Brittany paced the length of the heated marble floor, her eyes darting around the empty bathroom. Patricia and Donovan are downstairs right now, trying to figure out how to smuggle the physical assets out of the country before the feds arrive. I know exactly where they are hiding the reserves. I know about the bearer bonds locked in the Geneva vault. I know about the 20 million in uncut diamonds Patricia keeps in the false bottom of her antique vanity. I have the account numbers, the access codes, and the private transport logs. I will give you every single piece of it. I will turn over my own mother and brother to the federal prosecutors today. Meredith let a long, calculating silence stretch across the line. When she finally spoke, her tone was dripping with dark amusement. You are offering to entirely decimate your own bloodline, Brittany. What exactly is your asking price for this unprecedented level of betrayal? Brittany stopped pacing, staring at her own desperate reflection in the vanity mirror. I want the deed to this estate transferred immediately to my name. I want my personal $50 million trust fund completely shielded from the SEC asset freeze. You let me walk away untouched, and I will hand you the nails to seal their coffins. Meredith's voice remained perfectly clinical. You are asking for a golden parachute after actively participating in a massive criminal conspiracy. Tell me about Kendrick. You completely bankrupted your own husband 3 days ago to buy Donovan time. Do you feel any remorse for leaving a completely innocent man to face the cartel's wrath? Brittany let out a sharp, grating scoff of pure entitlement. Kendrick was collateral damage. He was a weak freelance accountant who got in way over his head trying to play in our world. I did exactly what I had to do to protect the Vance money. He was practically begging to take the fall anyway. He is a disposable asset, Meredith. Just like you were supposed to be. Now, do we have a deal or not? Meredith leaned into the deception, her tone shifting to one of cautious professional interest. If I am going to grant you financial immunity and shield your trust from federal seizure, I need to know your testimony is absolutely bulletproof. I need to know exactly what you were aware of. I will not make a deal based on hearsay. Desperate to prove her value, Brittany took the bait and sprinted directly into the trap. She laid out the entire criminal enterprise with breathtaking arrogance. She detailed precisely how Donovan had initially falsified the commercial real estate acquisitions in Manhattan to launder the Sinaloa cartel's cash. She explicitly described Patricia's role in setting up the offshore dummy corporations in the Cayman Islands to hide the massive internal deficit. She proudly admitted to knowing every single aspect of the fraud for the past 2 years, bragging about how she had personally helped Patricia shred the original physical ledger documents in the fireplace just weeks before the audit. The confession was a flawless masterpiece of self-incrimination. Brittany finished her frantic monologue, her chest heaving as she waited for Meredith to send the digital transfer releasing the estate. I can have the diamonds and the bearer bonds boxed and ready for your fixers by midnight. Brittany promised, a triumphant smile finally breaking across her face. We have a deal, right? Meredith let a heavy, terrifying silence stretch across the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely devoid of mercy. That is quite the comprehensive testimony, Brittany. I am absolutely certain the federal prosecutors will find it fascinating. Meredith paused, the faint sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. Did you catch all of that, Patricia? A sharp, ragged gasp echoed through the line, followed instantly by the sound of something heavy and glass shattering violently against a wall. Patricia Vance had been silently patched into the call for the last 12 minutes. The matriarch of the Vance dynasty had just listened in absolute horror as her precious golden child eagerly sold her out to the exact woman they had both considered nothing more than low-class disposable trash. The heavy oak door of the master bathroom splintered inward with a deafening crack as Patricia kicked it open. She stood in the threshold, panting heavily, her designer gown torn at the shoulder from her frantic sprint up the grand staircase. Her eyes were wild, completely devoid of the aristocratic composure she had maintained for decades. She stared at Brittany, who was frozen by the vanity still clutching the glowing smartphone. Patricia did not say a word. She crossed the heated marble floor in 3 massive strides and slapped her daughter across the face with a force that sent Brittany crashing to the ground. The phone skittered across the wet tiles. Brittany shrieked, tasting blood in her mouth. She scrambled backward, knocking over a row of expensive glass perfume bottles that shattered into jagged pieces all around them. You selfish, ungrateful little rat, Patricia screamed, her voice tearing at the seams. You were going to hand me over to the federal government to save your own pathetic skin. I gave you everything. I bought your husband. I funded your entire meaningless life. Brittany did not cower. The terror of losing her wealth completely overrode her fear of her mother. She grabbed a heavy silver hairbrush from the floor and hurled it directly at Patricia, striking her hard in the collarbone. "You ruined us!" Brittany shrieked, pulling herself up using the edge of the soaking wet bathtub. "You and Donovan dragged us into business with a cartel. You were going to let me go down with this sinking ship while you hid your uncut diamonds and bearer bonds. You are a monster." Donovan burst into the bathroom just as Patricia lunged forward, grabbing a handful of Brittany's perfectly styled blonde hair. The two women violently crashed into the glass shower enclosure. It was a vicious, terrifying brawl stripped of all high society pretense. Patricia clawed at her daughter's face, her manicured nails leaving deep bleeding scratches across Brittany's cheek. Brittany fought back with feral intensity, driving her knee upward and screaming about how the Vance family was nothing but a pack of thieving liars. Donovan rushed forward, grabbing his mother by the shoulders to pull her off. Patricia swung blindly, her heavy diamond ring catching Donovan squarely on the jaw and slicing his skin open. He stumbled backward, pressing a hand to his bleeding face. He looked at his mother and his sister rolling on the floor, slipping on expensive serums and broken glass, completely intent on destroying each other. The toxic loyalty that had bound the Vance family together for generations was entirely shattered. They were no longer a dynasty. They were cornered rats trapped in a cage, turning on each other for scraps of survival. A cold, terrifying clarity suddenly washed over Donovan. He looked at his custom platinum watch. The cartel's deadline was less than 3 hours away. The federal marshals could arrive with the eviction and arrest warrants at any minute. His mother was currently screaming about hiding assets while his sister was actively trying to sell them out to Meredith. They were liabilities. They were going to drag him down into a federal penitentiary or a cartel execution chamber. Donovan did not say a word to stop the fight. He simply turned around and walked out of the bathroom, leaving them to tear each other apart. He moved silently through the dim, sprawling hallways of the upper floor. He entered his private study and locked the door. He walked directly to the massive oil painting of his grandfather hanging behind his desk and pulled it off the wall, revealing a biometric steel safe. He pressed his thumb to the scanner. The heavy door clicked open. Donovan had always known this day might come. His supreme arrogance was heavily padded by a relentless sense of self-preservation. Inside the safe sat a heavy black duffel bag. He unzipped it to verify the contents. Inside were 2 pristine forged passports, one Canadian and one Irish, registered under untraceable aliases. Beneath the documents were thick, tightly banded stacks of high-denomination euros and Swiss francs, totaling nearly $3 million in untraceable cash. There were also 4 encrypted burner phones and the keys to an inconspicuous gray sedan kept permanently parked in the staff garage. He zipped the bag shut, slinging it over his shoulder. He took one last look around the mahogany study, the absolute seat of his power, and felt absolutely no remorse. He was leaving his mother to face the federal prosecutors. He was leaving his sister to deal with the heavily armed hit squads from Sinaloa. They were the perfect decoys to buy him the time he needed to disappear. Donovan slipped down the back servant stairwell, completely avoiding the chaotic aftermath in the main foyer. He moved like a ghost through the shadows of the estate, slipping into the staff garage and unlocking the dusty gray sedan. He threw his bag into the passenger seat and started the engine, pulling out onto the dark, winding roads of the private community. He drove with aggressive precision, keeping his speed exactly at the legal limit to avoid attracting any local police attention. The rain began to fall in heavy, blinding sheets, masking his escape. He navigated the back roads for 45 minutes, his heart hammering against his ribs as he constantly checked his rearview mirror for federal taillights or black cartel SUVs. There was nothing but empty darkness. He reached the perimeter of a small private airstrip located miles outside the city limits. This was a facility known for asking 0 questions and processing immediate international departures for clients willing to pay exorbitant cash fees. Donovan flashed his headlights twice at the security gate. The heavy chain link rolled open, granting him access to the slick, wet tarmac. A sleek twin-engine chartered Gulfstream sat waiting in the shadows, its navigation lights blinking and its engines emitting a low, powerful whine. The boarding stairs were already lowered. Donovan parked the sedan, leaving the keys in the ignition. He grabbed his heavy duffel bag and sprinted through the driving rain toward the aircraft. He took the stairs two at a time, his soaking wet shoes slipping on the metal treads. He stepped into the warm, luxurious cabin of the jet, pulling the heavy cabin door shut behind him and spinning the locking mechanism into place. The interior was immaculate, featuring cream leather seats and polished walnut tables. Donovan threw his duffel bag onto an adjacent seat. He walked straight to the small, wet bar, pouring himself a generous measure of bourbon with a shaking hand. He took a massive swallow, letting the alcohol burn down his throat. He sank heavily into the oversized captain's chair directly behind the cockpit partition. He closed his eyes and let out a long, trembling sigh of absolute relief. He had actually done it. He had beaten Meredith. He had outsmarted the federal government. He had escaped the cartel. By morning, he would be sitting in a private villa in a non-extradition country with $3 million in cash, completely untouchable. The latch on the cockpit door clicked. Donovan opened his eyes, expecting the pilot to ask for his final destination coordinates. The man who stepped out of the cockpit was not wearing a pilot's uniform. He was wearing a dark tactical vest over a federal windbreaker. A gold FBI badge gleamed brightly against his chest. His right hand was resting casually on the grip of a holstered sidearm. The agent looked down at Donovan, offering a cold, completely humorless smile. "Flight is canceled, sir." Donovan slammed the heavy, reinforced door of his sleazy attorney's office, the sound echoing sharply in the cramped, windowless room. He was wearing the exact same wrinkled, bespoke suit he had been arrested in 48 hours prior. The gold FBI badge of the federal agent on the tarmac was still burned into his retinas. Posting bail had completely and utterly liquidated the absolute last of his hidden emergency cash reserves. He was completely broke, legally banned from stepping foot near the Vance estate, and staring down a massive federal indictment for international money laundering. The deep scratch on his jaw, a parting gift from his mother's diamond ring during their vicious brawl, throbbed with a dull, relentless ache. His attorney, a morally bankrupt corporate fixer named Eris, slid a thick stack of freshly stamped legal documents across the scarred mahogany desk. Eris was the kind of lawyer who specialized in the gutter tactics that high society firms refused to touch. "We filed the emergency injunction under the Hague Convention," Aris stated, tapping a gold-plated pen against the top page of the paperwork. "We officially claim that Meredith abducted your son Leo across international borders without your legal consent or the court's prior knowledge. The federal judge signed off on the order exactly an hour ago. She has been mandated to appear in a New York family court by Friday morning. If she fails to show, she faces an immediate international arrest warrant for parental kidnapping." Donovan stared at the wet ink on the signature line, a malicious, hollow laugh escaping his throat. It was the ultimate, undeniable trump card. He did not care about Leo. He had barely spent 10 consecutive minutes a day with the boy before the divorce, treating him more like a photo prop for charity galas than a human being. But Leo was the only asset in the entire world that Meredith actually valued. She had stripped Donovan of his money, his legacy, and his untouchable status. Now he was going to strip her of her child. Donovan paced the length of the small, dimly lit office, aggressively outlining his ruthless strategy. The second Meredith sets foot on American soil and walks into that courthouse, we alert the district attorney that she orchestrated the entire cartel laundering scheme, Donovan instructed, spinning a web of complete fabricated lies. We frame her as the mastermind behind the shadow mortgages. While she is detained by federal marshals in the lobby, I will assume emergency physical custody of Leo. He leaned over the desk, his eyes burning with toxic, desperate energy. Once I have the boy locked down, she will surrender everything. She will sign over the holding company, she will transfer the estate deed back to my name, and she will drain her offshore accounts to buy his freedom and her own plea deal. Aris grinned quickly, finalizing the legal traps and false affidavits required to execute the blackmail. Donovan finally felt a massive surge of his old, arrogant power returning. His mother and sister had failed him, his wealth had evaporated, but he had found the one critical pressure point that could completely shatter Meredith's flawless, impenetrable armor. Halfway across the world, inside a pristine, glass-walled corporate office in London, Meredith sat perfectly still at the head of a massive conference table. Her lead counsel, a sharp, aggressive British litigator, projected the Hague Convention injunction onto the digital display screen. Kendrick sat immediately to her right. The former Vance family accountant looked significantly healthier, sharper, and entirely relieved to be working for the winning side. He had spent the morning reviewing the financial implications of Donovan's desperate legal maneuver while the litigators aggressively debated the physical risks. "This is a blatant, highly coordinated trap," Meredith, her lead counsel, warned, pacing urgently in front of the illuminated screen. "Donovan has exhausted his capital. He cannot fight you in a financial arena, so he is weaponizing family law to drag you violently back into federal jurisdiction. If you attend this hearing in New York, his team will absolutely ambush you." The lawyer pointed a laser pen at the custody clauses. "They will file fabricated criminal charges the moment you arrive. They will attempt to freeze your movements, seize Leo under emergency protective orders, and force a massive financial settlement under extreme emotional duress. You have dual citizenship. You are legally protected here in the United Kingdom. Do not get on a plane. Let us handle this through the international courts." Meredith did not blink. She stared at the digital copy of Donovan's signature on the court summons, her mind operating with the chilling, calculating precision of a supercomputer. She knew exactly how Donovan's mind worked. He relied entirely on brute force intimidation and the assumption that maternal panic would make her sloppy and predictable. He fully believed she would rush blindly into the courtroom, terrified of losing her son, ready to concede her empire just to hold her child. Meredith closed the physical case file in front of her and pushed her ergonomic chair back from the polished table. She looked directly at Kendrick, her expression entirely unreadable and completely devoid of fear. She reached for her sleek leather briefcase and began calmly stacking her encrypted tablets, physical dossiers, and flash drives inside. "Let him think he's caught me," Meredith stated, her voice echoing with quiet, chilling authority through the silent boardroom. "He expects a terrified, desperate mother begging for mercy. We are going to give him an absolute massacre." 12 hours later, Meredith walked down the narrow, crowded aisle of a commercial transatlantic flight. She had deliberately avoided chartering a private jet, knowing with absolute certainty that Donovan's fixers were actively monitoring international flight logs for her corporate tail numbers. She settled quietly into her modest first-class seat, blending in perfectly with the tired, unassuming business executives around her. As the massive aircraft taxied slowly toward the runway, she pulled out her secured smartphone and opened a direct message thread with Donovan. She did not write an essay. She did not offer explanations or empty threats. She typed a single, calculated sentence designed to feed his massive, fragile ego. "I'm coming back. Let's settle this in court." She hit send, watched the delivery confirmation appear on the screen, and immediately switched her device to airplane mode. In New York, Donovan sat in the back corner booth of a dark, overpriced hotel bar, nursing a glass of cheap scotch. His phone vibrated sharply against the sticky tabletop. He picked it up and read the message twice. A slow, venomous smirk spread across his bruised, unshaven face. He pocketed the phone and signaled the bartender for another drink, completely convinced he had just won the war. The automated glass doors of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 slid open instantly, triggering a blinding explosion of camera flashes and overlapping shouts. The international arrivals hall was completely packed. It was not a random gathering of paparazzi. It was a highly orchestrated, perfectly timed media ambush. Donovan had tipped off every major tabloid, local news station, and freelance photographer in the city. He wanted the entire world to watch him destroy his ex-wife on live television. Meredith stepped through the doors with her 7-year-old son Leo holding tightly to her left hand and Kendrick flanking her right side. She did not raise a hand to shield her eyes from the strobe lights. She did not break her stride. Standing in the absolute center of the media circus was Donovan. He had entirely dropped his usual arrogant billionaire persona. He was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance of a shattered, desperate man. He was wearing a slightly rumpled suit. His tie loosened, his eyes red and brimming with manufactured tears. As soon as Meredith crossed the threshold, Donovan dropped to his knees on the polished airport floor. He reached his hands out toward his son, his voice cracking with a perfectly calibrated sob that echoed through the reporters' microphones. He begged for his boy. He cried about international kidnapping and the agony of a father separated from his only child. Flanking the weeping billionaire were 4 uniformed New York City police officers and a grim-looking police captain. Eris Donovan's sleazy fixer attorney stood just behind the officers, clutching a thick leather binder. Meredith stopped exactly 10 feet away from the barricade of police. She gently guided Leo behind Kendrick, shielding the boy from the chaotic wall of cameras. The police captain stepped forward, his expression tight with professional discomfort but absolute authority. He held up a thick stack of court documents stamped with the seal of a federal judge. "Mrs. Vance," the captain said, raising his voice to be heard over the relentless clicking of camera shutters. "I have a court-mandated emergency injunction filed under the Hague Convention alongside a localized family court order. You are formally accused of international parental abduction. I am legally ordered to transfer physical custody of your son to his father immediately pending a full hearing on Friday morning. Please do not make this difficult. Hand the boy over to the officers." Donovan buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with fake relief. He had cornered her. He had utilized the full weight of the justice system to trap her in a public space where she could not use her money or her holding company to fight back. From the periphery of the terminal, standing safely behind a velvet security rope near a waiting black town car, Patricia Vance watched the scene unfold. Her face was partially hidden by massive designer sunglasses, concealing the deep scratches Brittany had left on her cheek just days ago. Despite her ruined empire, Patricia was laughing. It was a cruel, triumphant, utterly arrogant laugh. She crossed her arms, entirely convinced that the Vance family was finally reclaiming their leverage. Meredith did not flinch. She did not argue with the captain. She did not look at the cameras, and she certainly did not look at Patricia. She turned calmly to Kendrick. He snapped open his slim titanium briefcase and handed her a single heavily sealed manila envelope. Meredith pulled out a thick document bound with blue federal ribbon. She bypassed the uniformed officers and handed the paperwork directly to the police captain. The captain frowned, lowering the Hague injunction to inspect Meredith's document. As his eyes scanned the first paragraph, the authoritative posture completely drained from his body. His jaw tightened. He flipped to the second page, reading the bold black federal signatures at the bottom. "This is a Department of Justice federal protection order," the captain stated, his voice dropping to a cautious, highly respectful tone. "That is correct," Meredith replied, her voice ringing out crisp and clear over the murmuring press. "That document explicitly supersedes any localized family court mandate or emergency injunction. It permanently blocks family court jurisdiction over my son." Eris lunged forward, pointing an accusing finger at Meredith. "That is impossible. You cannot override a Hague Convention filing with a standard protection order. The boy belongs with his father." Meredith finally shifted her icy gaze to the sleazy attorney. "It is not a standard protection order. It is a mandated federal shield tied directly to an active sealed RICO investigation. The United States Department of Justice does not grant custody to targets of a federal racketeering probe involving the Sinaloa cartel. Donovan Vance and his mother are currently the primary subjects of a federal indictment for international money laundering and wire fraud." The cameras went absolutely wild. The reporters began shouting questions, the flashes doubling in intensity. The police captain immediately stepped back, creating a wide berth between himself and Donovan. He looked at his officers and gave a sharp, definitive hand signal. "Stand down," the captain ordered. "We have no jurisdiction here." Donovan's performance shattered in a fraction of a second. The fake tears vanished, replaced by an expression of absolute, unadulterated panic. He scrambled to his feet, looking around as the police officers actively backed away from him. He had brought the police to arrest her, and she had just publicly labeled him a federal cartel target on live television. Meredith took 2 steps forward, effortlessly invading Donovan's personal space. She looked at the man who had tried to destroy her life, the man who had just tried to weaponize her only child. She leaned in, keeping her voice low so only he could hear the absolute devastation in her words. Check page 42 of your discovery file before we go into that courtroom tomorrow. You brought a knife to a nuclear strike. The heavy mahogany doors of the New York federal courthouse swung shut, sealing the packed courtroom in a tense, suffocating silence. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters filled the back rows, furiously typing on their laptops, while high-profile legal analysts whispered eagerly among themselves. The media circus from the airport had spilled directly into the halls of justice. At the defense table, Donovan sat with his posture completely restored. The absolute panic from the tarmac had evaporated overnight, replaced by his signature aristocratic arrogance. He wore a pristine charcoal suit, his hair perfectly styled, the scratch on his jaw completely concealed by expensive makeup. Beside him sat Eris, his sleazy fixer attorney, who was currently arranging thick stacks of fabricated financial documents with a smug, confident rhythm. Meredith sat entirely alone at the plaintiff's table. She did not bring a legal team. She did not bring frantic binders of last-minute defense strategies. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded neatly over a single manila folder. Kendrick sat directly behind her in the first row of the gallery, maintaining a quiet, vigilant watch while Leo was safely secured miles away under federal protection. The presiding judge banged her gavel demanding order before instantly yielding the floor to Donovan's legal counsel. Aris stood up, buttoning his tailored jacket, and launched into a vicious, highly aggressive offensive. He paced back and forth in front of the judge, completely ignoring Meredith as he began painting a masterpiece of character assassination. Your Honor, we are here today because of a bitter, unstable, and highly vindictive woman. Aris declared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. My client Donovan Vance is a pillar of the New York financial community. He is the heir to a multi-billion-dollar equity firm that has operated with absolute flawless integrity for 4 generations. His ex-wife, however, is a disgruntled freelance bookkeeper who simply could not handle being removed from high society. Aris stopped pacing and pointed a sharp, accusatory finger directly at Meredith. When Donovan filed for divorce, she snapped. Aris continued, his tone dripping with practiced outrage. She fabricated an entirely fictitious narrative about cartel money laundering out of pure spite. She manufactured forged digital routing numbers and manipulated offshore holding accounts to steal the Vance family estate. She abducted my client's son across international borders to use the boy as leverage in a hysterical, pathetic smear campaign. Donovan offered the judge a look of profound, rehearsed sorrow. He nodded slowly, playing the part of the grieving, terrified father perfectly. Aris scoffed loudly, turning his attention to Meredith's professional background. He leaned against the wooden railing, making sure the entire gallery could hear his mocking tone. Let us look at her credentials, Your Honor. Meredith Vance is a freelance accountant. She ran basic payroll for local restaurants and balanced checkbooks for mid-level marketing agencies. The absolute audacity to suggest that a woman with her pedestrian community college skill set could somehow decipher, hack, and dismantle the highly encrypted international financial structures of the Vance equity firm is laughable. It is a fairy tale. She is not a financial mastermind. She is a scorned housewife who threw a highly illegal tantrum. Aris returned to his seat, aggressively dropping a massive stack of affidavits onto the table. The defense formally requests that this court immediately transfer full physical custody of the child back to his father and issue a federal warrant for Meredith Vance on the charges of fraud and parental kidnapping. The gallery erupted into frantic murmurs. The reporters typed furiously, convinced they were witnessing the total destruction of the rogue daughter-in-law. Donovan smirked at Meredith, a cold, triumphant gleam in his eye. He was entirely certain he had won. He assumed the comment about page 42 was just a desperate bluff. The judge banged her gavel, silencing the room. She looked down at Meredith, her expression a mixture of stern authority and professional curiosity. Mrs. Vance, the judge stated clearly, I see you have not retained counsel. Are you representing yourself today? Meredith stood up. Her movements were smooth, completely unbothered by the vicious character assassination she had just endured. Yes, Your Honor, Meredith replied, her voice calm, resonant, and absolutely commanding. I am representing myself, pro se. Donovan let out a short, mocking laugh, hiding it behind his hand. Aris shook his head, whispering something derogatory to his client. They firmly believed she was walking into a legal slaughterhouse without a shield. "Does the plaintiff have an opening statement?" the judge asked. "No, Your Honor," Meredith stated smoothly. The plaintiff waives the opening statement and calls her first witness to the stand. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the unorthodox maneuver. "You may call your witness." Meredith turned slightly, facing the heavy wooden double doors at the back of the courtroom. She did not look at Donovan. She did not look at Aris. "I call Director Arthur Sterling to the stand." The name echoed through the courtroom. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the heavy doors swung open. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a razor-sharp navy suit walked down the center aisle. He moved with undeniable authority, carrying a locked titanium briefcase. His expression was granite, his gaze fixed entirely on the witness stand. Aris frowned, leaning over to Donovan. "Who is that?" Aris hissed, his smug demeanor faltering. Donovan stared at this man, a cold spike of genuine dread suddenly piercing his chest. The absolute certainty he had felt seconds ago began to rapidly dissolve. He frantically remembered Meredith's warning at the airport. He had not read page 42. He had thrown the discovery file across the room, assuming it was just more fabricated financial nonsense. The man walked through the wooden gate, stepped into the witness box, and raised his right hand. He swore the oath with a crisp, booming voice that commanded absolute silence from the packed gallery. Meredith walked toward the podium, resting her hands on the polished wood. "Please state your name and occupation for the record," Meredith requested. "My name is Arthur Sterling." The man answered, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "I am the lead director of the Financial Crimes Division for the United States Securities and Exchange Commission." The entire gallery drew a sharp, collective breath. The reporter stopped typing, completely stunned. Aris dropped his gold-plated pen. It clattered loudly against the defense table. Donovan turned the color of ash, his knuckles turning white, as he gripped the armrests of his leather chair. "Thank you, Director Sterling." Meredith continued, her tone conversational but sharp as shattered glass. "Could you please inform the court of your professional relationship to me?" Director Sterling looked directly at Donovan before turning his gaze back to the judge. "Meredith Vance is not a freelance bookkeeper." The director stated, the absolute authority in his voice slamming into the defense table like a physical blow. "She is the top independent forensic auditor for the SEC. For the past 3 years, she has operated entirely undercover, reporting directly to my office. She is the principal architect who mapped, exposed, and systematically dismantled the international money laundering syndicate operated by the Sinaloa cartel and facilitated entirely by the Vance family equity firm." The absolute silence that followed Director Sterling's testimony was deafening. The packed courtroom seemed suspended in a vacuum, entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the revelation. Meredith was not a scorned housewife. She was the federal architect of the Vance family's destruction. Aris stood frozen at the defense table. His gold-plated pen lay abandoned on the floor. His entire aggressive strategy had just been completely vaporized. But men like Aris did not survive in high-stakes corporate law by surrendering. They survived by finding a new throat to cut. Aris violently cleared his throat, snapping out of his shock. He grabbed a fresh legal pad and rapidly shifted his entire defense paradigm. "Your Honor, the SEC has been catastrophically misled," Aris shouted desperately, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "My client, Donovan Vance, is a victim of an elaborate, highly sophisticated internal embezzlement scheme. If there was cartel money moving through the Vance equity firm, Donovan did not orchestrate it. The mastermind is the man who completely controlled the firm's ledgers. The missing chief financial officer, Kendrick Washington." Donovan blinked, catching onto his lawyer's frantic pivot. He instantly straightened his tie, arranging his features into a mask of betrayed innocence. Kendrick Washington vanished the moment the federal authorities began circling. Aris continued, his voice rising in manufactured outrage. "He manipulated the financial records, bypassed my client's executive oversight, and fled international jurisdiction with millions of dollars in stolen cartel assets. To prove this, the defense calls its next witness, Brittany Vance." Brittany walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, playing the part of the battered, traumatized wife with flawless precision. She had deliberately abandoned her usual designer wardrobe for a modest, high-necked beige dress, her hair pulled back in a simple, unassuming style. She stepped into the witness box, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore the oath with a trembling, fragile voice. Under Eris's aggressive questioning, Brittany delivered a masterclass in perjury. Kendrick controlled everything. Brittany wept, wiping away non-existent tears with a tissue. He isolated me from my family. He was financially and emotionally abusive. When Donovan gave him the position of CFO out of the goodness of his heart, Kendrick used that power to destroy us. He forged my brother's signature on the shadow mortgages. He threatened my life if I ever looked at the bank statements. He is a monster, and he tricked all of us. She sobbed into her hands, casting a pathetic, pleading look toward the jury box. Donovan watched his sister with quiet approval, entirely convinced their improvised lie was working. The judge looked down at the plaintiff's table. "Does Mrs. Vance wish to cross-examine the witness?" Meredith stood up. She looked at Brittany, who was still dabbing at her dry eyes. Meredith did not feel an ounce of anger. She only felt the cold, calculated thrill of watching an enemy dig their own grave on a federal sworn record. "I have no questions for this witness at this time, Your Honor," Meredith stated, her voice echoing clearly across the mahogany room. "However, the plaintiff calls its next witness to the stand, Kendrick Washington." Brittany's fake sobs stopped instantly. She dropped the tissue, her eyes darting frantically toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. Donovan gripped the edge of the defense table so hard his knuckles turned completely white. The heavy double doors swung open with a resounding thud. Kendrick walked into the courtroom. He was not missing. He was not a fugitive. He was wearing a razor-sharp charcoal suit, walking with absolute terrifying dignity. Flanking him on all four sides were heavily armed United States Marshals, their tactical vests displaying the federal seal. The gallery erupted into absolute chaos. Reporters stood up from their benches, craning their necks to get a clear view of the supposedly fugitive CFO. The judge violently hammered her gavel, threatening to clear the entire room if order was not immediately restored. Kendrick walked straight past the defense table. He did not look at Donovan. He walked up to the witness stand, standing inches away from his wife. Brittany was hyperventilating, her perfectly manicured hands shaking violently as a bailiff escorted her out of the box to make room for the new witness. Kendrick took the stand, swore the oath, and looked directly at Meredith. "Mr. Washington." Meredith began, her tone sharp and precise. "Could you please clarify your current legal status for the court?" "I have been granted full blanket federal immunity by the United States Department of Justice." Kendrick answered, his deep voice projecting absolute authority. "In exchange, I have provided the Securities and Exchange Commission, and you specifically, with the raw server data, the encrypted ledgers, and the offshore routing codes that prove Donovan and Patricia Vance actively laundered $90 million for the Sinaloa cartel." Aris leaped to his feet. "Objection! Hearsay! This man is a hostile witness attempting to deflect from his own massive financial crimes." "I have physical evidence, Your Honor," Kendrick stated calmly, reaching into his interior jacket pocket. The courtroom held its collective breath as Kendrick produced a small silver digital audio recorder. He set it down on the wooden ledge of the witness stand. "As the chief financial officer, I suspected Donovan was preparing to make me the fall guy for his illegal shadow accounts," Kendrick explained to the judge. "2 nights before the federal deadline, I placed a hidden recording device under the mahogany desk in the Vance family estate's primary study. This is the unedited raw audio of Donovan and Brittany Vance." Meredith nodded. "Please play the recording for the court." Kendrick pressed the button. A brief second of static hissed through the court's amplification system, followed immediately by the crystal-clear, unmistakable voice of Donovan Vance. Donovan's voice. "We pin the entire offshore network on Kendrick. He is the CFO. His digital signature is on the secondary transfer protocols." Brittany's voice. "Will the federal prosecutors actually believe it?" He doesn't have the clearance to authorize cartel volume. Donovan's voice. Of course they will believe it. Look at him, Brittany. He is just a black guy from the wrong side of the tracks who managed to marry into our money. He is the absolute perfect scapegoat. The jury will buy it without a second thought. We wash our hands, the cartel gets their clean cash, and he takes the fall in federal prison. Kendrick clicked the recorder off. The silence that slammed into the courtroom was heavier and more suffocating than anything that had come before. The sheer venomous bigotry and the blatant undeniable admission of guilt hung in the air like toxic smoke. The reporters in the gallery sat completely paralyzed by the sheer brutality of the recording. Iris slowly sat back down in his chair, his hands flat on the table, realizing his legal career was effectively over. Donovan stared straight ahead, his aristocratic jaw trembling, completely unable to form a single word of defense. Brittany let out a piercing, hysterical scream. The demure, victimized wife persona instantly vanished. She lunged forward, her high heels slipping on the polished floor as she frantically tried to bolt from the front of the courtroom toward the gallery exit. She scrambled wildly, pushing over a wooden chair in a desperate bid to escape the consequences of her perjury. Two massive court bailiffs stepped directly into her path. They planted their boots firmly on the ground and caught her by the shoulders, physically blocking her exit and locking her arms behind her back. Brittany thrashed against their grip, shrieking about how it was a setup, how the audio was faked, how her family was untouchable. The judge rose to her feet, her face flushed with absolute unbridled fury, bringing her heavy wooden gavel down with a deafening, relentless crack. The gavel cracked down like a gunshot, slicing through Brittany's hysterical shrieking. The judge stood at the bench, her face flushed with a righteous, absolute fury that radiated through the entire room. She pointed a trembling finger at the defense table, demanding total silence. The two court bailiffs dragged a hyperventilating Brittany back to a chair, forcing her to sit, while she continued to weep into her hands, completely broken. Aris remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the floor. He knew better than to utter a single syllable. "I have presided over this court for 2 decades, the judge stated, her voice dropping to a dangerously low, resonant register that echoed in the dead, silent room. I have seen bitter divorces. I have seen desperate parents. But I have never in my entire career witnessed such a blatant, malicious, and entirely fabricated abuse of the judicial system. You utilized a Hague Convention petition designed to protect abducted children as a weapon to facilitate federal extortion. You perjured yourselves, you manufactured evidence, and you attempted to use this courtroom to further a criminal enterprise. The judge picked up Donovan's emergency custody petition and ripped it precisely in half, dropping the pieces onto her desk. The Hague petition is dismissed with prejudice, the judge announced. Furthermore, based on the undeniable evidence of extreme criminal conspiracy, emotional abuse, and the clear present danger you pose to your family, I am issuing an immediate permanent ruling. Donovan Vance, your parental rights to Leo Vance are hereby completely and irrevocably terminated. You will have no legal, physical, or supervisory claim to this child. I am also issuing a permanent ironclad restraining order. If you come within 500 feet of Meredith Vance or her son, you will be jailed without bail. Donovan stared at the judge. The aristocratic, untouchable armor he had worn his entire life shattered into a million pieces. The reality of his total destruction finally breached his ego. He had no money, he had no legacy, he had no leverage. He was nothing. The silence held for one more second before Donovan completely snapped. A guttural, feral roar tore from his throat. He kicked his heavy wooden chair backwards so violently it shattered against the railing. "This is a farce," Donovan screamed, his face turning a mottled, furious red. His spit flew across the polished defense table. "You have no right. You are a local judge. You cannot strip my name from my own blood. I am a Vance. I own this city." He whipped around, pointing a shaking hand at Kendrick, who remained seated in the witness box with absolute, unbothered composure. "You street rat!" Donovan snarled, completely shedding his high society facade to reveal the vicious bigot underneath. "You stole my money. You infiltrated my family. I gave you everything. I made you." Kendrick did not blink. He simply adjusted his cuffs, looking at Donovan with absolute pity. Donovan's rage then locked onto the only target left, Meredith. She sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, watching his total unraveling with cold, satisfied detachment. Her composure was the final match to his explosive temper. "You did this!" Donovan roared, his eyes going wide and wild. "You ungrateful, calculating witch! I took you out of the gutter and you destroyed my empire. I will kill you." Donovan lunged. He vaulted over the heavy mahogany defense table, his hands outstretched like claws, aiming directly for Meredith's throat. It was a terrifying, instantaneous display of pure, unhinged violence, validating every single claim Meredith had ever made about his true nature. Meredith did not even flinch. She sat perfectly still. Before Donovan could clear the space between the tables, 3 massive state bailiffs tackled him from the side. The impact sounded like a car crash. Donovan hit the carpeted floor hard, the wind knocked out of his lungs. The bailiffs instantly pinned his arms behind his back, pressing their knees into his spine to neutralize his violent thrashing. He kicked and spat completely feral, screaming profanities that echoed off the gallery walls. "Hold him for contempt of court!" the judge ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. But before the bailiffs could drag Donovan to his feet, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open for the final time. Director Sterling stepped aside. 12 federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers with FBI printed in bold yellow letters marched down the center aisle. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, completely bypassing the panicked reporters and the stunned legal aides. They marched directly to the front of the court. The lead federal agent flashed his badge at the state bailiffs, who immediately stepped back, transferring physical control of Donovan to the federal authorities. Donovan Vance, the lead agent, announced, his voice carrying the absolute crushing weight of the United States government. "You are under arrest. We are executing federal warrants for violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, international wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering on behalf of a designated transnational criminal syndicate." Heavy, thick steel handcuffs clicked decisively over Donovan's custom platinum cufflinks, locking his wrists together. He was hauled roughly to his feet, his tailored suit completely ruined, his face smeared with dust from the courtroom floor. Simultaneously, a sharp scuffle broke out in the back of the gallery. Patricia Vance, who had been sitting in the shadows attempting to slip out the side exit, was violently intercepted by 2 female FBI agents. They slammed the Vance matriarch against the paneled wall, her expensive designer sunglasses clattering to the floor and breaking. "Get your hands off me!" Patricia shrieked, her aristocratic composure completely dissolving as cold steel cuffs were slapped onto her wrists. "I am a victim. My son handled the accounts. Donovan orchestrated the offshore transfers. I knew nothing." Donovan whipped his head around, staring at his mother in absolute betrayal. "You authorized the shell companies!" Donovan screamed across the courtroom, actively throwing his own mother to the wolves to save himself. "Your signature is on the bearer bonds. You negotiated with the cartel envoys in Madrid." Brittany, still detained in her chair, began wailing uncontrollably. "They forced me to lie," she screamed at the federal agents. "Donovan and my mother made me commit perjury. I will testify against them. I will tell you everything they did." The legendary Vance family, once the untouchable royalty of New York high society, was actively tearing each other to pieces on the courtroom floor. There was no loyalty. There was no dynasty. They were nothing but a pack of cornered, desperate criminals turning state's evidence on their own blood just to save their own skin. As the federal agents dragged Donovan, Patricia, and Brittany up the center aisle in chains, the flashing cameras of the press documented every single second of their humiliating downfall. Meredith stood up from her table, smoothing out the fabric of her skirt. She looked at Kendrick, sharing a single victorious nod. The house of cards had not just collapsed, it had burned to ash. The media circus outside the federal courthouse raged for weeks following the arrests. But inside the quiet halls of justice, the dust had finally settled. The Vance empire, built on a century of aristocratic arrogance and cartel blood money, was dismantled brick by brick. With the federal government freezing every single corporate and personal asset connected to the family, the remaining pieces of their lives were swiftly swept away. Kendrick wasted zero time severing the final infected tie to the Vance family. With Brittany sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting her own conspiracy trial, Kendrick filed for divorce. He executed a flawless surgical legal strike. Brittany attempted to fight for alimony, clinging to the delusion that she was still a wealthy socialite, but her demands were completely destroyed by reality. Because her personal assets were completely entangled in the cartel laundering scheme he had exposed, the Department of Justice seized her entire portfolio. Brittany was left with absolutely nothing. No trust fund, no designer wardrobe, no offshore safety net. She went from dripping in diamonds to wearing a standard-issue prison jumpsuit. Kendrick walked away clean, his federal immunity absolute and his reputation vindicated. He leased a massive corner office in Manhattan the very next month, launching his own independent financial consulting firm. He used his brilliant analytical mind to legally audit the exact types of corrupt high society hedge funds the Vances used to run. Corporations desperate to prove their federal compliance flocked to his door. His client list doubled within weeks, establishing him as one of the most feared and respected financial auditors on the East Coast. The ultimate erasure of the Vance legacy occurred on a crisp Tuesday morning on the front lawn of Patricia's sprawling, beloved Hamptons estate. Meredith attended the public federal auction wearing a sharp navy trench coat, standing quietly near the back of the crowd of hungry investors and spectators. Patricia had spent millions renovating the historic multi-acre mansion, treating the marble columns and imported fountains as her personal monument to high society supremacy. Now it was just another seized asset on the government auction block, being sold off to pay federal restitution. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the perfectly manicured rose gardens. Meredith watched with immense quiet satisfaction as the winning bid went to a commercial real estate developer. As the crowd dispersed, Meredith heard the developer immediately instructing his chief architect to bulldoze the entire property. They were going to level Patricia's pristine, elitist sanctuary to the ground and zone the acreage for high-density affordable housing. The sheer poetic justice of it washed over Meredith like a warm breeze. The Vance name was not just ruined. It was being physically erased from the earth, replaced by the exact demographic of people Patricia had spent her entire life looking down upon. Meredith turned and walked away from the estate, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of the past 3 years finally lift off her shoulders. 6 months later, the toxic smog of New York courtrooms felt like a distant, fading nightmare. Meredith sat comfortably on the sprawling stone balcony of a private sun-drenched villa in the heart of Tuscany. The warm Italian air smelled of crushed lavender and sun-baked earth. A few yards away in the enclosed garden, Leo was laughing wildly, chasing a stray butterfly across the vibrant green grass. He was safe, completely untouched by the darkness his father had tried to drag him into. A sleek silver phone resting on the wrought iron patio table vibrated, shattering the quiet afternoon peace. Meredith picked it up. Kendrick's voice came through crystal clear over the international line. "I just walked out of the federal sentencing hearing," Kendrick announced, a deep sense of satisfaction radiating through his voice. The judge did not hold back. Meredith leaned back in her chair, keeping her watchful eyes on her son. "Give me the numbers." Donovan got 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, without the possibility of parole. Kendrick stated, his tone carrying the weight of final justice. Patricia caught 10 years for her role in the international wire fraud and racketeering conspiracy. Brittany is currently negotiating a plea deal for 5 years, but the prosecutors are refusing to budge on the perjury charges. They are entirely broken, Meredith. It is over. We won. Meredith smiled, a genuine, unburdened expression that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Kendrick, for everything." She ended the call and set the phone down next to her open laptop. The screen illuminated, displaying a highly encrypted, secure email notification that popped up in the center of her monitor. The sender was Director Arthur Sterling from the SEC Financial Crimes Division. The message was incredibly brief, devoid of any official pleasantries. "We have a new target operating out of a private equity firm in Geneva. The financial structures are heavily encrypted, and they are moving vast sums of untraceable capital, ready for the next one." Meredith picked up her crystal glass of vintage Chianti. She took a slow, deliberate sip of the fine wine, savoring the rich, complex flavor. She looked out over the breathtaking, fiery orange sunset bleeding across the rolling Italian hills, listening to the joyful sound of her son laughing in the distance. She placed her hands on the keyboard and typed her response. I am always ready. Fade to black. The Vance family's spectacular downfall illustrates a profound truth. Arrogance blinds people to their own vulnerability. Donovan and Patricia believed their wealth made them untouchable, leading them to dangerously underestimate Meredith and Kendrick. Instead of fighting back with loud threats, Meredith weaponized their arrogance, quietly building an airtight case against their corruption. True strength does not roar from a podium or hide behind a prestigious last name. It operates in the shadows of integrity and precise execution. When faced with toxic environments, your greatest defense is silent, undeniable competence. What is your biggest takeaway from Meredith's victory? Comment below.